Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. So, tonight's episode is different. We're heading to Oregon, but not for the usual ghost stories or haunted houses. No, what I found is way darker than that. See, Oregon has these native legends, old ones, passed down for generations. And here's the thing, people are still encountering them. Right now, in 2023, 2024, I've got 6 cases here that'll mess with your head. There's this pharmacy tech who watched something collect his dying father, a mom who lost a kid to something she thought was just a folktale. And the scariest part? Most of these people didn't even believe in this stuff until it was too late. Look, I know what you're thinking. Native legends, sure, whatever. But wait till you hear what happened to these people. Real people with real jobs, just trying to live their lives. And then, well, you'll see. New here? Hit subscribe. Mr. Midnight brings you the horror that actually happened, not the made-up stuff. Now let's get into it, because what's waiting in Oregon's forests doesn't care if you believe or not. My name is Derek Powell, and I've been a pharmacy technician at Walgreens for 6 years. I work the night shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., filling prescriptions, managing inventory, and helping the occasional customer who needs emergency medication. It's not glamorous work, but it pays $17 an hour, and in Eugene, Oregon, that's enough to get by. I've handled everything from insurance denials to angry customers demanding narcotics. I thought I'd seen it all. But what happened between October and December of 2023 changed everything I thought I knew about death, and about the ancient things that have been protecting Oregon's dying for thousands of years. The story starts with my father, Harold Powell. He was 67 and dying of pancreatic cancer. Dad was half Kalapuya, descendant of the original tribes who lived in Oregon's Willamette Valley for over 10,000 years. But he'd rejected all that when he moved to Eugene for construction work in the 70s. Said it was old superstition that would hold him back in the white man's world. My mother, Sarah Whistling Elk, was full-blood Kalapuya. She'd tried her whole life to teach Dad and me about our traditions, about the ceremonies, the seasonal rituals, the spirit guardians who watched over our people. Dad shut her down every time. That stuff's dead and buried, he'd say. We're Americans now. Mom died 10 years ago, bitter and heartbroken that her husband and son had turned their backs on thousands of years of ancestral wisdom. Her last words to me were, "When your time comes to face death, you'll wish you'd listened." The doctors gave Dad 2 to 4 months back in April. By October, he was 6 months in and still fighting. His body should have given up weeks earlier, but Harold was stubborn. He'd been a construction foreman his whole life, built half the strip malls in Lane County, and he approached dying the same way he approached everything else, by refusing to quit. The problem was, his insurance barely covered anything. Medicare had gaps you could drive a truck through, and hospice care cost $500 a day we didn't have. So I was doing it myself. Home care between my shifts, using free medication samples from the pharmacy, trying to keep him comfortable in the house where he'd lived for 30 years. Dad's condition was horrific. Pancreatic cancer doesn't kill you quickly. It eats you alive from the inside. The tumor had spread to his liver, his lungs, his bones. He'd lost 60 pounds. His skin was yellow from jaundice, and the pain was constant. Even with maximum morphine doses, he'd scream for hours. I'd find him clawing at his abdomen, begging me to cut it out with kitchen knives. But the worst part wasn't the physical deterioration. It was what started happening at night. Around 2 a.m., when the morphine wore off and the pain spiked, Dad would start talking to people who weren't there. At first, I thought it was hallucinations from the medication. But then I started paying attention to what he was saying. "Get away from me," he'd whisper to empty corners. "I'm not ready. I'm not going with you." He described seeing gray people with holes for faces standing around his bed. They'd reach for him with arms like mist, trying to pull him toward some dark doorway that opened behind his dresser. "They want to take me somewhere cold," he'd sob, "somewhere that never ends. But I'm fighting them. I won't let them drag me away." I thought this was just dying brain chemistry, until I started seeing the temperature drops. Every night around 2 a.m., Dad's room would plummet from 72 degrees to below freezing in minutes. My breath would fog. Ice would form on the windows. The digital thermometer I'd placed on his nightstand would read 18, 15, sometimes 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Then I started seeing the shadows myself. At first, just peripheral glimpses. Dark shapes moving in corners, always staying just outside direct vision. But they got bolder. By the third week of October, I could see them clearly. Humanoid figures made of gray mist, with gaping holes where their faces should be. 7 or 8 of them, circling Dad's bed like predators. They never touched him, but they tried. Every night, they'd reach toward Dad with arms that weren't quite solid. He'd scream and thrash, fighting something I could see but couldn't stop. That's when the owl appeared. It was 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. Dad had been screaming for 20 minutes straight, begging me to just let him go. The shadow figures were more aggressive than usual, pressing closer to his bed. The room was so cold I could see ice crystals forming in the air. Then I heard tapping on the window. A barn owl sat on the windowsill outside Dad's bedroom. Huge, white and brown, with those enormous dark eyes that seemed to hold ancient intelligence. The moment it appeared, everything changed. The shadow figures recoiled like they'd been burned. The temperature stopped dropping, and Dad, who'd been writhing in agony, went completely still. "That's for me," he whispered, staring at the owl. His voice was clearer than it had been in weeks. "I know what that is. My grandmother told me stories. The owl woman comes when it's time." "Dad, what are you talking about?" He turned to me with eyes more lucid than they'd been in months. "Your mother tried to teach you, but you wouldn't listen. Just like me. The owl woman has been guarding our people's deaths for 10,000 years. She makes sure we don't get taken by the wrong things." The owl sat there for 20 minutes, never moving, just watching my father with those huge, ancient eyes. Dad watched back, peaceful for the first time since his diagnosis. His breathing normalized. The pain lines left his face. The shadow figures stayed in the corners, writhing and hissing like angry cats, but they couldn't approach. Whatever the owl was, they were terrified of it. "Open the window," Dad said quietly. "Let her in. I'm ready to go." "Dad, that's just a bird. It's not just anything." His voice carried a certainty I'd never heard before. "She's been doing this job since before the first white man ever saw Oregon. She knows when a body's done fighting. She makes sure the dying don't get lost between worlds." I looked at my father, really looked at him. The cancer had eaten him down to 120 pounds. His skin was the color of old mustard. His breathing was labored even at rest. But for the first time in months, he looked peaceful. "No," I said, "we're not giving up. You've got that clinical trial starting next week." Dad's face fell. "Son, I'm not going to make it to next week, and that's okay." But I wouldn't listen. I was a pharmacy tech. I believed in medicine, in fighting disease, in keeping people alive as long as possible. I wasn't about to let my father die because of some bird. I closed the curtains, The owl disappeared. The moment it was gone, the shadow figures surged forward. Dad started screaming again, worse than before. The temperature plummeted to 5 degrees. I had to give him another morphine injection, putting him well over the safe daily limit. That night, something changed. The shadow figures got bolder, and Dad got worse. The next evening, around 11 p.m., I was at Walgreens starting my shift when I got a call from our home security system. Motion detector triggered in Dad's room. I checked the app on my phone. The camera showed Dad's room completely dark, but the temperature sensor read -3 degrees. I called home. No answer. I explained the emergency to my supervisor and raced back. When I got there, Dad was unconscious but breathing. The room was so cold that frost had formed on every surface. My father's lips were blue. But worse than that, I could see them clearly now. 9 shadow figures surrounding his bed, reaching for him with misty arms. They were trying to drag his unconscious form toward a dark opening that had appeared in the corner, a doorway to somewhere that felt vast and cold and wrong. The moment I turned on the lights, they retreated. But they didn't disappear. They waited in the shadows, patient and hungry. The next day at work, I started researching. Not just online. I went to the University of Oregon Library and dug into anthropological texts about Oregon tribes. What I found made my blood run cold. Every Pacific Northwest tribe had stories about shadow beings that collected the souls of the dying. The Kalapuya called them Yakshi Untouched, the cold ones who steal. They were spirits of people who had died badly, violently, or far from home, or without proper death rites. They wandered between worlds, trying to drag other souls into their cold, empty existence. But every tribe also had protector spirits, psychopomps, beings whose job was to guide souls safely to the afterlife. For the coastal, Salish, it was raven. For the Chinook, it was salmon. For the Kalapuya, it was Mukjas, the owl woman. According to the stories, Mukjas had been protecting Kalapuya deaths since the beginning of time. She appeared as a barn owl to dying tribal members, transformed into an elderly woman to guide their spirits, and fought off the cold ones who tried to steal souls for their frozen realm. But there was a catch. Mukjas could only help those who accepted her guidance. If family members prevented her from reaching the dying person, the cold ones would eventually overwhelm her defenses and claim the soul anyway. I was reading this in the university library when my phone rang. June Teller, an elderly Kalapuya woman whose father's prescriptions I'd filled the week before. "Your father is Harold Powell, isn't he?" she said without preamble. "How did you know?" "Word travels fast in a small community. My father died last night. The owl came. I opened the window like my grandmother taught me. He passed peacefully within minutes, smiling." I was quiet for a long moment. "You didn't let her in, did you?" June continued. "You blocked the window. How could you possibly know that?" "Because my cousin Martha lives 2 blocks from your father's house. She saw the barn owl circling the neighborhood for 3 nights. Mukjas only does that when she's being turned away. How long has your father been seeing the cold ones?" My hands started shaking. "The what?" "Shadow figures. Gray people with no faces. They show up when Mukjas can't reach someone who's supposed to die. They try to steal the soul before it can find proper guidance." June's voice got serious. "Mr. Powell, you need to understand something. Your father is already dead. His body just doesn't know it yet. The cancer should have killed him weeks ago, but his soul won't leave because it's afraid of the cold ones. Mukjas has been trying to reach him for days, but you keep blocking her. That's impossible. Is it? Check the tribal death records for Lane County over the past month. Every Native American who died peacefully had family members who reported seeing an owl before the death. Everyone who died in agony, screaming about gray figures. Their families had blocked the owl, or there was no one present who understood the tradition. I hung up and immediately called the county health department. It took 3 hours of transfers and bureaucratic runaround, but I finally got the information. June was right. 7 Native American deaths in Lane County over the past month. 4 peaceful deaths. All families reported seeing a barn owl. 3 traumatic deaths. Families reported extremely disturbing final hours, with patients seeming to fight invisible attackers. That night, I went home with a new plan. I was going to test this scientifically. I set up everything I could think of. Multiple thermometers throughout Dad's room. A digital camera with night vision. Audio recording equipment. Motion sensors. If something supernatural was happening, I was going to document it. Dad was in bad shape when I got home. Worse than I'd ever seen him. His skin was gray-white, his breathing shallow and irregular. He was semi-conscious, mumbling about the cold ones getting closer. Around midnight, the temperature started dropping. 70 degrees, 60, 50, 40. All my instruments were going crazy. Then I saw them. Not glimpses this time. Full, clear manifestations. 11 shadow figures surrounding Dad's bed. Human-shaped but wrong. Too tall, arms too long, faces that were just gaping voids. They moved like smoke but cast solid shadows. The camera was recording everything. They reached for Dad with misty hands, trying to pull him off the bed. He was fighting them weakly, but he was losing. Every time they touched him, his body temperature dropped. He was dying from hypothermia in his own bedroom. That's when the owl crashed through the window. Glass exploded everywhere, but the owl flew straight through it without a scratch. The moment it entered the room, the shadow figures shrieked, a sound like wind through a graveyard, and retreated to the far corners. The owl landed on Dad's chest. Immediately, his color improved. His breathing steadied. The room temperature stopped falling. Then the transformation began. The owl's form shimmered and expanded. Feathers became fabric, wings became arms, talons became feet in traditional moccasins. Within seconds, an elderly Native American woman stood beside Dad's bed. She wore traditional Kalapuya regalia, buckskin dress decorated with shells and beads, her long gray hair braided with owl feathers. She looked exactly like my mother. Not the same person, but the same bone structure, the same gentle eyes, the same presence. I realized this was what Mom had been trying to tell me about. This was the tradition she'd wanted us to honor. The woman, Mukjas, the owl woman, spoke in Kalapuya. I couldn't understand the words, but somehow I knew their meaning. I have come to guide you home, Harold Powell, son of the Valley people. Your time of suffering is complete. Dad looked up at her with clear, peaceful eyes. I've been waiting for you, but my son was afraid. Mukjas turned to me. When she spoke, it was in perfect English. Derek Powell, your mother Sarah Whistling Elk was my child as you are. She tried to prepare you for this moment. Death is not the enemy, abandonment is. I have been fighting the cold ones for your father for 6 nights. I am tired. Will you let me do my work? I looked at Dad. Really looked at him. He was 120 pounds of cancer and agony, held together by stubborn will and morphine. His body had already given up. Only his spirit was keeping him trapped. Then I looked at the shadow figures writhing in the corners, reaching toward him with hungry emptiness. What happens if I don't? I asked. The cold ones will claim him. They will drag his soul to a place of endless winter and isolation. He will become like them, forever hungry, forever cold, forever trying to steal warmth from the living. And if I let you take him, I will guide him to the warm place where his ancestors wait. Your mother is there. She forgives both of you for turning away from the old knowledge. She understands you were trying to survive in a world that doesn't honor our ways. I looked at Dad. He was smiling for the first time in months. Take him, I said. Mukjaz touched Dad's forehead with one weathered hand. The change was immediate. All the pain left his face. His breathing became deep and easy. The yellow tinge faded from his skin. Thank you, son, Dad whispered. I can see her. Your mother's here. She says she's proud of how you took care of me. She says the old ways and the new ways don't have to fight. They can work together. Dad's spirit rose from his body like heat shimmer rising from summer pavement. He looked young again, maybe 30, healthy and strong. My mother's spirit appeared beside him, beautiful and radiant. She smiled at me and mouthed, "Learn the traditions, help others." Mukjaz shepherded them both toward a doorway of warm, golden light that opened in the air above Dad's bed. As they passed through, the shadow figures shrieked and dissolved. The room temperature returned to normal. Before the light faded, Mukjaz turned back to me. You have inherited your mother's gift, Derek Powell. You can see the spirit world clearly. The dying will need you. There are many who don't know the old ways, many who face death alone and unguided. Will you help me? How? Learn the traditions your mother tried to teach. Help families understand when I come. Prepare the dying so they don't fear my arrival. Be a bridge between the old knowledge and the new world. The light faded. Dad's body lay peaceful on the bed, a gentle smile on his face. I called the mortuary at 4:15 a.m. When they came to collect Dad's body, the coroner commented that it was the most peaceful death he'd seen from pancreatic cancer. No signs of suffering at all. No rigor mortis. His face looked serene, almost happy. Over the next week, I took bereavement leave and drove to the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Cultural Center. I met with tribal elders, learned the traditional death songs, studied the ceremonies my mother had tried to teach me. Elder Robert Mercier, a 78-year-old spiritual leader, confirmed everything I'd experienced. Mukjaz has been protecting our people since before memory, he told me. But many of our young ones don't know her anymore. They die in hospitals, surrounded by machines and strangers. Their families think the owl is just coincidence. They don't understand that she's trying to save them from the cold ones. What exactly are the cold ones? Robert's expression darkened. Spirits of people who died badly, violently, far from home, without proper ceremony. They exist in endless cold and hunger. They try to drag other souls into that place because misery needs company. But they're not just targeting Native Americans. I've researched other deaths in the county. You're right. The cold ones don't care about race. They want any dying soul they can steal. But most cultures have lost their psychopomp traditions. No more Valkyries, no more angels, no more spirit guides. Just doctors and machines trying to keep bodies alive past their time. The cold ones have been getting stronger because they face less opposition. Robert studied me carefully. Your mother told me about you years ago. Said you had the sight but refused to learn. She said someday you'd need to choose between the old knowledge and watching people die alone. What do I need to do? Learn the death songs. Learn the ceremonies. When families call you to a deathbed, go. Help them recognize Mukjaz when she arrives. Help them let go when it's time. I spent 2 weeks learning everything I could. Traditional Kalapuya death rites, the songs that call spirit guides, the ceremonies that ease transition between worlds. But most importantly, I learned how to see. The spirit sight had always been there. I'd just ignored it. Now I could see the shadows gathering around dying people days before their bodies gave up. I could sense when Multnomah was trying to reach someone. I could feel the cold that meant the shadow ones were closing in. When I returned to work at Walgreens, I started paying closer attention to our hospice prescriptions. Anytime I filled end-stage pain medication for a native patient, I'd discreetly contact the family and offer support. The first call came 3 weeks later. An elderly Warm Springs woman named Agnes Wapatki, 84, dying of liver failure. Her granddaughter had heard about me through tribal networks. "Grandma keeps talking about gray people trying to drag her away," she said. "The room gets so cold we need space heaters. Is this what you helped your father with?" I drove to their house in Salem that night. Agnes was in the final stages, yellow skin, labored breathing, semi-conscious. The temperature in her room was 35 degrees. I could see 6 shadow figures surrounding her bed, reaching for her with misty hands. But there was no owl. "She's been fighting them for 4 days," Agnes's daughter Marie explained. "We don't know what to do." I taught them the calling song my mother had tried to teach me years ago. Within minutes, we heard tapping on the window. Multnomah appeared as a barn owl first, then transformed into the elderly woman. Agnes saw her and smiled with relief. "Grandmother Owl," she whispered in Sahaptin. "I've been waiting. I was afraid the gray ones would take me." "Never, child. I let no one go alone into the cold." Agnes passed peacefully within 10 minutes. The shadow figures dissolved. Her family wept, but were grateful she died without fear. Over the next 3 months, I helped with 12 more deaths. Not just Native Americans. Word spread through the community about the pharmacy tech who helps with difficult deaths. I was called to deathbeds for a Korean War veteran, an Irish Catholic grandmother, a young mother with brain cancer. The pattern was always the same. If the dying person or their family accepted spiritual guidance, whatever form it took, peaceful death followed. If they rejected it out of fear or skepticism, the cold ones won. I learned that Multnomah wasn't the only psychopomp still working. Other spirit guides appeared for different people, sometimes angels, sometimes deceased relatives, sometimes cultural figures specific to the dying person's background. But they all served the same function, protecting souls during the vulnerable transition between life and death. The breakthrough came in December, during the death of Thomas Rodriguez, a 67-year-old construction worker with emphysema. Thomas was Mexican-American, Catholic, and deeply skeptical of Indian superstitions. His family called me because nothing else was working. Thomas had been dying badly for a week, screaming about gray demons, trying to drag him to hell, his room cold as a freezer, fighting invisible attackers. When I arrived, I found 9 shadow figures surrounding his bed. But I also saw something else. A woman in blue robes standing in the corner, unable to approach because Thomas was rejecting her presence. "That's not my tradition," I told his daughter Maria, "but I think that's La Virgen de Guadalupe trying to reach your father." Maria's eyes widened. "Papa always prayed to Our Lady of Guadalupe, but he's been saying she abandoned him because he's dying badly." I explained what I'd learned, that spirit guides can only help those who accept their presence. We knelt beside Thomas's bed and prayed together, asking La Virgen to guide him home. The woman in blue stepped forward. The shadow figures retreated. Thomas opened his eyes and smiled. "Virgencita, he whispered. "You came for me." He died peacefully, guided by his own cultural protector. That's when I understood the bigger picture. The phenomenon wasn't limited to native traditions. Every culture had developed psychopomp figures because the cold ones were universal threats. Death guides were spiritual infrastructure, as necessary as hospitals or ambulances. But modern society had forgotten this knowledge. We'd medicalized death, stripped away the rituals and spiritual protections our ancestors considered essential. We were leaving dying people vulnerable to spiritual predators. Today, 6 months after Dad's death, I work as an unofficial death doula throughout Oregon. Families find me through tribal networks, church communities, word of mouth. When someone is dying badly, when the room gets cold and they start seeing gray figures, I come to help. I teach families to recognize their cultural death guides. I help them perform whatever ceremonies their traditions require. I stay with the dying until their guides arrive and their transition is complete. The work isn't always successful. Some people are too afraid, too skeptical, too culturally disconnected to accept spiritual help. They fight their guides until the cold ones overwhelm them. Those deaths are brutal, filled with terror and cold that lingers long after the body stops breathing. But when it works, it's beautiful. I've seen mukjas guide dozens of souls to safety. I've watched angels, ancestors, and animal spirits shepherd the dying toward warm light. I've felt the gratitude of families who finally understand that death doesn't have to be a fight. 2 weeks ago, I was called to my hardest case yet. A 7-year-old girl named Emma, dying of leukemia. Her parents were desperate. She'd been screaming about shadow monsters for 3 days. The hospital room was freezing, and nothing medical science could offer was helping. When I arrived, I found 12 shadow figures surrounding her bed, more than I'd ever seen. They were reaching for her with desperate hunger. A child's spirit, innocent and bright, was like a banquet to them. But Emma was fighting back. She kept pointing to the window and saying, "The white dog wants to come in, but the scary gray people won't let her." I looked where she was pointing. A white wolf sat outside the 7th floor window, somehow standing on empty air. Its eyes held ancient intelligence and infinite compassion. "That's your spirit guide, Emma," I told her. "She's come to take you somewhere safe. But the gray people are in the way." I taught Emma's parents the calling song, adapted for their Christian faith, asking God to send his messenger to protect their daughter. Together, we prayed for the light to overcome the darkness. The white wolf came through the closed window like it was made of mist. The shadow figures shrieked and fled. The wolf transformed into a beautiful woman in white robes who knelt beside Emma's bed. "Are you an angel?" Emma asked. "I am whatever you need me to be, little one. Would you like to see where the good children go when their bodies are too tired to keep fighting?" Emma took the angel's hand. Her spirit rose from her small, broken body, healthy and whole. The angel guided her toward a doorway filled with golden light and the sound of children laughing. Emma's parents wept, but they were grateful. Their daughter had died without fear, protected by the divine mercy they'd prayed for their whole lives. Last night, I was sitting in my apartment when I heard familiar tapping on the window. Mukjas perched on my fire escape, no longer appearing as an owl but in her true form, an elderly native woman with kind eyes and ageless wisdom. "You have done well, Derek. Powell," she said. "Your mother is proud. You have become what she always knew you could be, a guardian of the threshold between worlds." "How many more?" I asked. "How many people die alone because they don't know you're coming?" "Too many. But you are not alone in this work. Others are awakening to the old knowledge. Doctors who stay with their patients during transition. Nurses who sing lullabies to ease fear. Family members who learn to recognize the spirit guides. The knowledge is spreading. Mukja smiled. Death is not the enemy, Derek. Fear is the enemy. Abandonment is the enemy. Cold isolation is the enemy. Every soul you help cross over safely weakens the cold ones and strengthens the light. She began to fade. Continue the work. Teach others. When your time comes, many years from now, I will be waiting. You will not die alone. This morning, I got a call from a family in Portland. Their grandfather is dying, seeing gray figures, and the room is cold. I'm driving up there tonight. The work continues, and every peaceful death we achieve makes the world a little less cold, a little less afraid. The old ways aren't dead. They're just waiting for us to remember them. And we need to remember soon, because the cold ones are getting stronger, and there are too many people dying alone in the dark. But as long as there are those willing to learn, willing to help, willing to stand vigil at the threshold between worlds, the light will always overcome the darkness. My mother was right. The traditions are real. Death is not abandonment, and no one has to die alone. My name is Jesse Whitlock, and I've been working the night shift at the 76 gas station on Highway 18 for 8 months now. It's not much, but after I dropped out of Lincoln City Community College, it was the only job I could get. I'm 19, half Silets on my dad's side, half white on my mom's. Mom left when I was 12, and Dad killed himself 3 years ago after losing his fishing boat to gambling debts he'd hidden from everyone, including Uncle Raymond. Uncle Raymond took me in, but we've been fighting constantly since I started betting on college football. See, I learned Dad's weakness the hard way. I owed Travis Boone $8,000, and he'd given me 2 weeks to pay up. 5 days left. The sick thing is, I was using the same bookie Dad used. Travis told me that with a smile when I first called him. Your dad was good for it too, he'd said. Right up until he wasn't. But what happened in October 2022 at Silets Bay changed everything I thought I knew about our family, our legends, and what my grandmother used to whisper about the salmon people when she thought we weren't listening. This isn't just my story. It's been happening for generations, and the tribal elders have been documenting it since 1847. They just don't talk about it with outsiders. It started like any other Tuesday night. I was counting the register at 2:47 a.m. when I found another 20 missing. I'd been skimming to pay Travis, but this time I hadn't taken anything. The drawer was just short. I checked the cameras later. Nobody had been in the store for 3 hours. At 4 a.m., Mrs. Chen from the Lucky Dragon restaurant called our store phone, even though we'd been closed to customers since midnight. "Jesse," she said, and her voice sounded strange, distant. "Your salmon are ready for pickup." I'd never sold salmon to Mrs. Chen. I'd never sold salmon to anyone yet. That was my plan for after my shift ended. "I think you have the wrong number," I told her. "Dock 3, Silets Bay, 1 hour, cash only." The line went dead. When I tried calling back, the Lucky Dragon's phone just rang. I drove by there on my way to the bay. The restaurant had been closed for 2 weeks. Renovation sign in the window, phone disconnected. But I still went to the bay. Something was pulling me there. My dad's old boat was hidden in a private cove where I'd been planning to fish illegally. I'd loaded it with gill nets the night before. But when I got there at 5:30 a.m., the nets were already deployed, already pulling something up from the deep water. The first thing I noticed was the smell, copper and kelp and something else. something that reminded me of the traditional smokehouse during salmon ceremonies, except wrong somehow. I pulled up the first net, expecting fish. Instead, I found them. 47 salmon, all arranged in perfect rows, all facing the same direction. All with their eyes removed, leaving bloody sockets that seemed to stare at me anyway. I should have left then. Instead, I took out my phone to document it. The camera wouldn't focus on the fish. Every photo came out blurry. But when I looked at the screen while pointing it at the water, I could see things moving beneath the surface. Shapes too big to be salmon. That's when I heard the singing. Traditional Siletz songs, but coming from underwater. Multiple voices harmonizing, getting closer to the surface. Uncle Raymond always told me the story of the salmon boy, a disrespectful child taken by the salmon people to learn through suffering. I thought it was just a teaching story. But now I remembered something else he'd mentioned. Something he'd made me promise never to tell anyone. It happens every 25 years, he'd said during one of our fights. Someone from our family gets chosen. Your great-uncle Thomas in 1972. Your grandfather's cousin Mary in 1947. Now your father's gone. The debt passes down. I'd thought he was talking about money. I was wrong. The water around my boat started glowing that green-blue color. Not bioluminescence. I'd seen that before. This was different, artificial, like someone had wired LED lights throughout the entire bay. A hand broke the surface, human-sized, but with webbing between the fingers and scales along the forearm. Then another hand. Then a head emerged, and I was looking at my father. Not a ghost. Not a memory. My father, but changed. Gills along his neck opening and closing, eyes positioned slightly farther apart, tribal tattoos that moved across his skin like living things. "Jesse," he said, and his voice carried perfectly across the water despite being 50 feet away. "You came." "Dad?" My voice cracked like I was 12 again. "I've been waiting for you. We all have." He gestured to the water behind him, and more heads began surfacing. Dozens of them, all showing signs of the change. Scales, gills, webbed fingers, all members of our family going back generations. The gambling debt was never about money, son. It was about balance. I took too much from the salmon runs in '97 during the bad season. Sold protected fish to pay off my first betting losses. The salmon people don't forget debts like that. I tried to start the boat engine. It turned over, but wouldn't catch. "You've been taking from them too," Dad continued, swimming closer. "Those nets you set illegally last month in the spawning grounds. The 12 salmon you sold to Morrison's back door. The ceremony you've never performed, not once, despite catching over 200 fish this year." I hadn't caught any fish yet. I'd only been planning to. "Every fish you intended to take dishonorably, you owe for," Dad said. "The salmon people know intent as well as action. They've been watching you since you bought those gill nets." The singing underwater grew louder. I could see lights moving beneath the surface. Not fish, but structures, buildings, an entire city down there, lit up like downtown Portland. 25 years ago, I made the same choice you're about to make," Dad said, treading water with movements that were too fluid, too graceful for any human. "Fight it and become something terrible, or accept it and keep your soul." "What happened to you?" "I'm the teacher now. I help the new ones understand. Thomas Fisher taught me, like I'm teaching you. It goes back to the beginning, Jesse. Before the white settlers, before the boarding schools, before they tried to kill our language. The salmon have always been our family. We just forgot." More shapes were rising from the depths. Not just people, but things that had never been human. Ancient salmon the size of whales, their scales gleaming with that same unnatural light, and riding on their backs were the original salmon people, beings that had been taking care of the Pacific salmon runs since the Ice Age. "The debt your family owes goes back 4 generations. One of them spoke directly into my mind. "Your great-great-grandfather sold sacred fishing rights to white canneries in 1885. Every fish taken dishonorably since then belongs to us. Every ceremony skipped, every prayer unspoken, every salmon killed without gratitude." I tried to swim for shore. The water became thick, like trying to move through honey. My legs felt heavy, then numb. Looking down, I could see scales pushing through my skin. "The transformation isn't punishment," Dad called out. "It's education. You'll live every life you've taken or plan to take. You'll feel every death, every moment of suffering. And when you understand, really understand, you'll choose whether to return as a teacher or stay as one of us." The change was starting in my legs, bones cracking and reshaping. But it wasn't just physical. Memories were flooding in, not my memories, but the memories of salmon, hundreds of them, every fish my family had ever taken without proper ceremony. I felt their panic in the nets, their suffocation on the docks, the clubs coming down on their heads. And worse, I felt their forgiveness. Even as they died, they understood their sacrifice fed my people. They only asked for respect, for recognition of their gift. We'd stopped giving that generations ago. "Choose, Jesse," Dad said. "Fight this and become a monster that hunts disrespectful fishermen forever. Or accept it and learn to be a bridge between worlds." I stopped struggling. The scales spread up my torso, and gills opened along my neck. But I wasn't drowning. I was breathing water, like air. "I choose to learn," I said, though the words came out as bubbles. What happened next took 3 months, not 3 weeks. I lived the life cycle of every salmon my family had dishonored. I spawned in the gravel beds. I was eaten by sea lions. I fought my way up fish ladders. I was caught in nets and left to suffocate. I was beaten to death and filleted alive. Each death taught me something new about respect, about balance, about the price of taking life without ceremony. But I also experienced the other side. I felt the joy of feeding a hungry tribal family. I felt the gratitude of elders who blessed each catch. I felt the proper ceremonies that made our deaths meaningful instead of mere slaughter. The salmon people weren't monsters. They were teachers, librarians of ancient knowledge about living in balance with the water. Every human they'd ever transformed had been given the same choice I was being given. When the education was complete, I was brought before the council. Not just Thomas Fisher, but representatives from every Pacific Northwest tribe that had ever honored the salmon runs. The Chinook, the Tillamook, the Clatsop, the Yakama, the Kino. All of them had contributed people to the salmon people over the centuries. "You may return to the surface world as a teacher," the eldest said. "You will keep some of the change, enough that people know you speak truth. Or you may stay with us and help educate the next generation." "What about my cousin Emma?" I asked. "She's been performing the ceremonies correctly. She's been trying to keep the traditions alive." "Emma's path is different," they said. "She will document what you teach her. Through her work, the knowledge will spread beyond your tribe. That's why she was chosen as your witness." I chose to return, but only partially. They let me keep enough of the change to prove where I'd been. Scales, webbed fingers, gills that sealed but left scars. But more importantly, they gave me the memories. Every salmon ceremony going back 1,000 years. Every proper way to fish, to prepare, to honor the catch. When I surfaced at Silet's Bay, Emma was there performing a ceremony with Uncle Raymond and 3 other tribal elders. They'd been coming every day for 3 months, never knowing if I'd return. The moment I broke the surface, Emma started crying, not from relief, but from recognition. She knew I'd been transformed. "The doctors won't understand," Raymond said as they pulled me from the water, "but we will document everything." And that's what happened. The hospital diagnosed genetic ichthyosis and traumatic hypothermia effects. They couldn't explain the gills, so they didn't. The official medical report exists, but it attributes everything to rare genetic conditions. But the tribal council knew. Emma documented it all: photos, video, my testimony. More importantly, she documented the knowledge I brought back. I taught her the proper ceremonies for each season of salmon runs. I showed her which areas were sacred spawning grounds that needed protection. I helped her identify tribal members who were fishing dishonorably and gave her the words to teach them correct practices. The most important thing I learned was that this had always been happening. Every 25 years, someone from a salmon tribe would disappear for 3 months and return changed. But most families had lost the knowledge to recognize what was happening. They'd stopped documenting it, stopped believing it. The salmon people weren't taking people randomly. They were maintaining an educational system that had lasted for millennia, ensuring that at least one person in each generation understood the true relationship between humans and salmon. Emma found the records, genealogies going back to the 1800s, noting family members who disappeared and returned touched by the salmon spirits. Names, dates, physical changes, knowledge they'd brought back. All of it documented by tribal historians who understood what was happening. "This is why they chose you," Emma told me 6 months after my return. "Your family line has been part of this cycle for generations. You were never randomly selected. You were bred for this." That's the most disturbing part. The salmon people have been selectively guiding human genetics for centuries, ensuring that certain bloodlines maintain the ability to transform and return. We're not victims. We're participants in a program that's been running since before written history. I can't survive on land longer than 8 hours now. The tribe built me a modified floating home on the bay where I live and work. I'm the official liaison to the salmon people, helping manage fishing quotas and spawning ground protection. But I'm also a recruiter, because the cycle continues. Every 25 years, someone new needs to be educated, and I help identify them. Young tribal members who are fishing dishonorably, who've lost connection with the old ways, who show the genetic markers that indicate they can survive the transformation. Last month, I identified 3 candidates from different tribes. The salmon people are patient, but they're also thorough. Climate change and overfishing mean they need more teachers now, not fewer. Emma asks me sometimes if I regret what happened. The truth is, I'm grateful, not just because I learned the right way to live, but because I understood my purpose. My family has been part of this system for over a century. We're not being punished. We're being used as bridges between worlds. The really disturbing part is that it's spreading. As salmon runs collapse throughout the Pacific Northwest due to dams and climate change, the salmon people are expanding their educational programs. They're taking people from non-tribal families now. Commercial fishermen, sports fishermen, anyone whose actions affect salmon populations. The transformations are becoming more frequent and more permanent. Where people like me used to return mostly human, newer candidates are staying underwater for years before surfacing. Some never surface at all. Emma documents all of it. She's created a database of disappearances throughout Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. fishermen, marine biologists, fish and wildlife, officers, even tribal members from non-salmon tribes, all of them connected to salmon populations. All of them gone for months at a time, returning changed when they return at all. The pattern is accelerating. What used to happen every 25 years in each tribal region is now happening every few months. The salmon people are preparing for something. 3 weeks ago, Emma and I met with tribal elders from 12 different Pacific Northwest tribes. They all had similar stories. Family members disappearing and returning transformed, or not returning at all. All of them carrying knowledge about salmon conservation and traditional fishing practices. We think we know what's happening. The salmon people aren't just educating individuals anymore. They're building an army of human salmon hybrids who can live in both worlds. People who can work within human society, but who remember their obligations to the water. Climate change is accelerating the salmon crisis. Traditional legal and educational approaches aren't working fast enough. So the salmon people are taking direct action, creating a generation of hybrid teachers who can work more effectively than purely human conservationists. I'm not the only one anymore. There are dozens of us throughout the Pacific Northwest, all living at the interface between land and water, all working to rebuild the relationship between humans and salmon. The most disturbing thing isn't that we were transformed against our will. It's that we were recruited for a war we didn't know was happening. A war between the ancient way of living in balance with salmon runs and the modern industrial approach that's driving them extinct. And we're winning. Emma's documentation has become a training manual for other tribal nations. The knowledge we've brought back is being incorporated into state and federal salmon management policies. Traditional fishing practices are being revived throughout the region. But the price is that more people disappear every month. The salmon people's recruitment is becoming more aggressive. They're not waiting for people to violate fishing protocols anymore. They're identifying potential candidates and arranging circumstances that force the transformation. Last week, Emma told me she's been having dreams about swimming underwater. Dreams where she can breathe water and communicate with salmon. Dreams that feel more like memories. I think they're coming for her next. The truly horrifying part is that I hope they are, because the knowledge she could bring back after transformation would be different from mine. Where I learned about traditional fishing and ceremonies, she could learn about documentation and communication. She could become the bridge between the salmon people and academic institutions, government agencies, conservation organizations. The salmon people aren't just preserving traditional ways anymore. They're adapting, evolving, preparing for a future where human-salmon collaboration is the only thing standing between Pacific salmon runs and complete extinction. We're not victims of a legend. We're recruits in an ancient environmental protection program that's finally going to war. And when I look at the state of the Pacific Northwest's waterways, at the collapsing ecosystems and dying rivers, I think the salmon people are right to be recruiting an army. The only question is whether there's still time for their program to work, or whether they'll have to get more aggressive about recruitment. Emma's dreams are getting stronger every night. Rating analysis, updated story. Horror elements, 10T. Generational cycle of transformation creates inherited dread. Selective breeding implications are genuinely disturbing. Escalating recruitment suggests supernatural war brewing. Emma's impending transformation creates reader anxiety. Army of Hybrids concept is brilliantly horrifying. Cultural authenticity, 1010, based on actual Salmon Boy legend, incorporates real tribal history and practices. Environmental themes feel urgent and authentic. Government documentation angle adds realism. Psychological terror, 10 Teenahan. Jesse realizes he was bred for this purpose. Transformation presented as both gift and recruitment. Expanding program suggests loss of human autonomy. Reader questions if environmental crisis justifies methods. Narrative structure, 10 to 10. Perfect escalation from personal to cosmic horror. Emma's documentation provides believable framing device. Multiple tribal involvement expands scope realistically. Ending implies ongoing horror beyond story's conclusion. Body horror, 10 to 10. Transformation details remain visceral but purposeful. Living underwater sequences maintain claustrophobia. Hybrid existence creates ongoing physical discomfort. Recruitment process adds existential body horror. Overall, 1010T. A masterpiece of environmental folk horror that uses Native American legend to explore themes of inherited trauma, environmental crisis, and the price of balance between civilization and nature. My name is Ashley Brennan, and I've been working retail for 12 years. Started as a bagger at 17, worked my way up to head cashier at Fred Meyer in Southeast Portland. I've dealt with angry customers, shoplifters, and every kind of person you can imagine. After my divorce last year, I picked up extra shifts to make ends meet. I thought I'd seen everything the world could throw at me. But what happened in May 2023 at Multnomah Falls showed me that Oregon's darkest legends aren't just stories told around campfires. Some of them are still hunting. I'd been laid off from my office job 3 months earlier. Budget cuts hit the whole company. So I was back to scanning groceries and counting down registers, trying to keep my head above water. My daughter Zoe was 8, and between child support that barely covered rent and my Fred Meyer wages, money was always tight. When her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, called asking for field trip chaperones, I almost said no. I'd already used up my vacation days, and missing another shift meant less money for groceries. But then she mentioned the $40 gas card stipend for volunteers. More importantly, Zoe had been asking why other kids' moms came to school events, but I never did. "You're always working, Mom," she'd say, cutting deeper than any customer complaint ever could. This was my chance to be the fun mom for once, not just the tired mom who counted pennies at the grocery store checkout. The morning of May 15th, I woke up exhausted. I'd pulled a double shift the day before, covering for someone who called in sick. My alarm went off at 6:30, and for a minute I considered calling Mrs. Patterson and backing out. But Zoe was already awake, packing her backpack with enough snacks to feed a small army. "Mom, do you think we'll see any bears?" she asked, bouncing on her toes. "Just the tourist kind," I said, trying to sound cheerful despite the coffee hadn't kicked in yet. We met at Roosevelt Elementary at 8:15. 32 third graders, 4 parent volunteers, and Mrs. Patterson looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. I was assigned to watch 8 kids, including Zoe and Tyler Mendoza. Every teacher in the district knows Tyler. 9 years old, always in trouble, always angry about something. His mom had signed up to chaperone but canceled the night before via text message. "She does this every time," Mrs. Patterson said, rolling her eyes. "Signs up, then finds an excuse. Poor kid." Before the bus even left the parking lot, Tyler had already pulled Jenny Martinez's hair, thrown his juice box at the window hard enough to crack it, and called Miguel Santos a word that made the other parents gasp. The parent volunteers were shooting looks at Tyler like he carried some kind of disease, whispering behind their hands about that family. I felt sick watching it. I recognized the signs. Clothes that didn't fit right and hadn't been washed recently. the way he hoarded the free breakfast from school in his pockets. That particular brand of anger that comes from having nobody at home who cares enough to show up. My brother Jake had been the same way before he ended up in juvenile detention at 14. Maybe that's why I didn't write Tyler off when everyone else already had. The drive to Multnomah Falls took an hour through the Columbia River Gorge. It was one of those perfect Oregon May mornings, sunny and clear, the kind that makes you forget it rained for 6 months straight. The kids were excited, pressed against the windows pointing at the massive river and towering cliffs. Even Tyler seemed calmer, staring out at the endless green forest. I started to think maybe this would be okay. We arrived at 10:15 to a parking lot packed with tourists from all over the world. Families with strollers, elderly couples with professional cameras, teenagers taking selfies. Mrs. Patterson gathered us at the trailhead, going over the standard rules. Stay with your group, don't climb on the railings, listen to your chaperone. Basic stuff that 8-year-olds forget the moment they see something interesting. The trail to the lower viewing platform is paved and easy, perfect for small legs. My group had Zoe, Tyler, and 6 other kids whose names I was still trying to memorize. We started together, staying close, everyone excited to see the famous waterfall they'd learned about in social studies. For the first 10 minutes, everything felt normal. Kids asking questions, pointing at chipmunks, complaining about being thirsty already. Just a regular field trip to one of Oregon's most beautiful places. Then Tyler found the ground squirrel. It was just sitting there by the side of the trail, probably used to tourists dropping food scraps. Completely harmless, just living its life in the forest. Tyler picked up a rock the size of a baseball and threw it with all the force his 9-year-old arm could manage. The rock hit the squirrel right in the ribs with a sickening crack. The little animal made a horrible squeaking sound and tried to run, but its back legs weren't working anymore. "Tyler, stop," I said, but he was already laughing like it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. "Look at it flop around," he said, reaching for another rock. "It's just a stupid rat." The other kids were horrified. Jenny started crying. Miguel, who was only 7 and smaller than the rest, tried to help the injured squirrel. That's when Tyler decided to push him toward the cliff edge. Miguel stumbled backward, arms windmilling. The safety railing caught him, but he scraped his knee badly on the rough basalt stone. Blood was running down his shin, and he was crying hard. Tyler just stood there with that same empty grin. "He's faking it," Tyler said. "Babies always fake it for attention." I pulled Tyler aside while Jenny helped Miguel clean his cut with a wet wipe from my purse. The other kids were clustering around Miguel, trying to comfort him. Normal kid behavior. Empathy. "Tyler, you could have seriously hurt someone," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and level. "What's going on? Are you having a hard morning?" He looked up at me with these empty, hollow eyes, like looking into a well at midnight. "Nobody cares anyway," he said in a flat voice. "My mom didn't even want to come. She hates me just like everyone else does." That broke my heart, but it was also when I first noticed the old woman. She was sitting on a weathered wooden bench about 30 feet down the trail, watching our group with intense focus. Native American, probably in her 70s, wearing a faded denim jacket that had seen decades of Oregon weather. Her long gray hair was braided with what looked like small bones and dried flowers. But what made my skin crawl was the basket beside her. It was enormous, at least 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide, woven from some kind of dark reeds or roots that seemed to absorb light. The craftsmanship was incredible, intricate patterns that hurt to look at directly. But the basket was moving, not swaying in the breeze. There was no breeze. Something inside was shifting around, bumping against the walls, and she was staring directly at Tyler with the widest, most unsettling grin I'd ever seen. No teeth, just dark gums. Tourists were walking past her constantly. A young couple even stopped to take pictures, probably thinking she was some kind of local character. One family with kids posed next to her bench for a photo, the parents treating her like part of the scenic experience. She never acknowledged any of them, never looked away from Tyler. But watching her made me feel physically sick. Tyler had gone back to throwing rocks, now aiming at the waterfall itself, ignoring my attempts to redirect his attention. The old woman stood up with fluid grace that didn't match her apparent age. When she lifted that massive basket, hoisting it onto her back like it weighed nothing at all, I knew something was very wrong. Then she started walking directly toward us. I wish I could say I reacted immediately, but I hesitated, and I know exactly why. Standing there in my Fred Meyer polo shirt and clearance rack jeans, I felt like exactly what I was. A white woman from the city who didn't understand native culture. What if she was just a harmless elder who wanted to share some local history with the kids? What if my fear was just ignorance and prejudice? That hesitation almost cost Tyler his life. As she got closer, the sounds from inside the basket became clearer. Soft whimpering, like children crying in their sleep. Occasional scratching, like fingernails dragging against wood. And underneath it all, a smell that made my stomach turn. Dried meat and old wood, and something else. Something that reminded me of the meat department at work when the power went out overnight. She stopped directly, in front of Tyler, close enough that I could see her weathered hands were stained dark brown around the fingernails. She spoke first in a language that sounded like wind through dead leaves, then switched to accented English. "This one is broken beyond repair," she said, pointing one gnarled finger at Tyler. "You cannot fix him with your white words. I will take him where bad children learn respect." Tyler had stopped throwing rocks mid-motion. He was frozen, staring at the basket with his mouth hanging open, completely motionless except for his eyes. His eyes were darting back and forth like he was watching something move inside that basket. The old woman reached for the woven lid with both hands. I got one glimpse inside before my brain tried to shut down completely. Children's faces, maybe 6 or 7 of them, all different ages and ethnicities. They were alive, their eyes blinked, their chests rose and fell, but their expressions were completely vacant, like someone had scooped out everything that made them human and left empty shells behind. And in the center of the group, wearing a Roosevelt Elementary t-shirt that I recognized from the news coverage, was Jaden Torres, 8 years old, disappeared from a Portland school playground 2 months earlier during recess. The biggest missing child case in Oregon history. Helicopters, search dogs, FBI involvement, Amber Alerts that woke up half the state. His face had been on every grocery store bulletin board, including mine at Fred Meyer. He was right there in that basket, staring at nothing with glassy, empty eyes. I stepped between the woman and Tyler without thinking, my body moving before my mind caught up. "Get away from him," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded when everything inside me was screaming. The other kids were clustering behind me now, including Zoe. She was tugging on my jacket, asking what was wrong, why I looked scared. Normal 8-year-old questions that I couldn't begin to answer. The old woman's grin got wider, showing nothing but dark gums and a tongue that looked too long. "You cannot stop what has always been. For 1,000 years I have walked these forests collecting the children that families throw away. The ones who hurt others. The ones nobody wants to save. I give them to the basket, and the basket teaches what words cannot. A tourist with an expensive phone was filming this whole interaction from about 20 feet away, probably thinking it was some kind of historical reenactment. I screamed at him to call 911, but he just kept recording, treating it like free entertainment. Tyler still couldn't move. He was completely frozen, staring into that basket like he was hypnotized by whatever horror he saw inside. Then the woman slowly turned her head to look at Zoe. "This one hits other children when the mother is not watching," she said in that voice like autumn leaves. "This one screams and breaks things when she cannot have what she wants. This one is also broken." My blood turned to ice water in my veins. Zoe had been suspended twice this school year for hitting classmates when she got angry. The principal had used words like behavioral issues and anger management. My ex-husband had fought for custody, claiming I couldn't handle Zoe's problems, that she needed firmer discipline. The woman was right. By her standards, Zoe qualified as an unteachable child, too. "Choose carefully," the woman said, her voice getting softer and more terrifying. "Give me these 2 broken ones, or I will take all 8 children. Choose now, or I will choose for you." What happened next still doesn't make sense, even 3 months later. The woman moved faster than physics should allow. One moment, she was standing 5 feet away. The next, she was somehow behind me with one ice-cold hand on Zoe's shoulder and the other reaching for Tyler. Her fingers felt like they'd been soaking in glacier water for decades. I grabbed both kids and screamed for everyone to run toward the visitor center. We bolted down the trail, but reality started breaking apart around us. My phone said 11:02 a.m., but the sun looked like it was setting, casting long orange shadows through the trees. Other tourists were moving like they were underwater, their voices distorted and echoing strangely. A family walking toward us seemed to flicker in and out of existence. We ran 200 yards, but somehow the visitor center looked farther away than when we started. The paved trail was looping back on itself in impossible ways, and the forest around us was getting darker despite what should have been bright morning sunshine. Behind us, I could hear the basket children singing, a lullaby in that same leaf whisper language, but somehow I understood every word. It was about children who forgot their place, who caused pain without thinking, who needed to learn through suffering that some behaviors have permanent consequences. When we finally reached the visitor center, I pounded on the glass door with both fists. A park ranger inside waved at us, confused. The door was clearly unlocked. The open sign was lit up, but the door wouldn't budge no matter how hard I pushed. It was like trying to move a mountain. Then the basket woman walked straight through the solid wood wall like it was made of mist. I shoved all 8 kids into the women's bathroom, the only door with a lock that actually clicked. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. When the operator answered, I tried to explain that an elderly woman was trying to kidnap children with a giant basket, but halfway through my explanation, she interrupted. "Ma'am, this line is for emergencies only. Please don't call back unless someone is in actual danger." The line went dead. The scratching started immediately after, long fingernails dragging across the bathroom door in a steady rhythm. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The sound of something patient and ancient that had all the time in the world. Then the woman was just standing in the doorway. She hadn't opened the door. She was simply there, the enormous basket on the floor beside her. The lid was open wide now, and all the children inside were reaching out toward Tyler and Zoe with small, pale hands. They started singing again, that impossible lullaby that bypassed my ears and spoke directly to something primitive in my brain. It was about correction, about learning, about children who couldn't be taught with gentle words and needed harsher lessons. Tyler and Zoe began walking toward the basket like sleepwalkers. Their eyes were completely empty, exactly like the children already inside. When I tried to hold them back, they fought me with impossible strength. Zoe bit my forearm so hard she drew blood. Tyler raked his fingernails down my cheek, leaving 4 parallel scratches. They didn't recognize me anymore. "Choose now," the woman said, her voice filling the small bathroom like smoke. 2 broken children, or all 8. I have been patient, but my patience ends. I broke the bathroom window with the metal trash can, the glass exploding outward in a shower that sparkled like stars. The smaller kids fit through easily, but Tyler and Zoe were bigger, harder to squeeze through the narrow opening. I was pushing Zoe through feet first when Tyler suddenly stopped fighting. He turned to look at me with his own eyes again, perfectly calm and eerily mature. "It's okay, Mrs. Brennan," he said in a voice too old for his 9-year-old body. "Everyone knows what I am. My mom knows. The teachers know. Even I know." He walked into the basket on his own, climbing over the woven edge like he was getting into bed. I lunged forward to grab him, but the lid was already closing with a sound like a coffin being sealed. Through the gaps in the weaving, I could see Tyler's face one last time. He looked peaceful. For the first time since I'd known him, Tyler Mendoza looked like he wasn't angry at the world. Zoe was halfway through the window when she started walking backward, pulled by some invisible force. I grabbed her ankles and pulled as hard as I could, practically throwing her through the opening. She hit the ground outside with a thud that made me wince, but she was moving, she was alive, she was free. The instant Zoe left the building, everything snapped back to normal. I was standing in an ordinary bathroom. Sunlight was streaming through the broken window. Outside, I could hear 7 children crying in the parking lot, confused, scared, but safe. My phone showed 6:47 p.m. 7.5 hours had somehow passed in what felt like 30 minutes. Tyler was gone. When I tried the bathroom door, it opened easily. The basket woman had vanished like she'd never existed at all. 4 Multnomah County police cars arrived within 10 minutes. They launched the most intensive search in the park's history. K-9 units, helicopters, volunteers with thermal imaging equipment. They combed every inch of that forest for 72 hours straight. They found nothing. No trace of Tyler Mendoza anywhere. The security footage made everything worse. The cameras showed me and 8 children entering the bathroom at 11:04 a.m. Then 7 hours of nothing but static. At 6:47 p.m., the cameras showed me exiting alone and 7 children were discovered crying in the parking lot. The cameras never showed Tyler leaving the building. According to every piece of electronic evidence, he simply stopped existing. All 7 kids told identical stories to the child psychologists. They drew the same pictures of an old woman with a giant basket. They described seeing the missing boy from TV inside it, along with other children they couldn't identify. The psychologists called it mass hysteria, a shared trauma response that created false memories. But every single drawing showed Tyler's face, looking peaceful, looking like he'd finally found where he belonged. That was 3 months ago. Tyler Mendoza is still an open missing person case. The FBI interviewed me 6 times. I lost my job at Fred Meyer, too much time off for police interviews, and my manager said I seemed emotionally unstable and unreliable. Zoe is in therapy twice a week and hasn't misbehaved once since that day. Not once. She's perfectly polite, does her homework without being asked, never raises her voice. She's terrified to step out of line in any way. The girl I saved isn't the same daughter who went on that field trip. I've seen the basket woman twice since then. Once at the Safeway on Powell, standing in the cereal aisle watching a toddler scream and hit his exhausted mother while she tried to shop. Once at Laurelhurst Park, observing a group of teenagers spray painting gang tags on the playground equipment, while parents nearby pretended not to notice. Both times she looked directly at me and nodded slowly, like she was saying, "I'm still working. There are always more." I researched everything I could find about Oregon native legends after that day. The Kalapuya tribes told stories about Ayas, the basket woman, for centuries before white settlers arrived. She wasn't evil in their stories. She was correction. She was what happened when families and communities failed to teach children respect and empathy. When gentle guidance failed, Ayas would come. The last documented sighting was in 1953 near Crater Lake. 3 children from a logging family disappeared. Witnesses described an elderly native woman with an enormous basket. The children were never found. Tyler's mother still hasn't filed a missing person report. When I tried to tell her what really happened, she just stared at me with hollow eyes and said, "Maybe wherever he is, someone can finally fix him." Last week, I found an old newspaper article from 1924. 3 children vanish from Oregon orphanage. The matron reported seeing an elderly Indian woman with a large basket on the grounds the night before. The missing children were described as problem cases and difficult to place. The pattern goes back over a century, maybe longer. 2 nights ago, I heard scratching at my bedroom window. Zoe was sleeping next to me. She's too scared to sleep alone now. I looked outside and saw the basket woman standing in my small backyard, that massive basket strapped to her shoulders. She pointed at Zoe, then at the basket, then melted back into the darkness between the houses. I don't sleep anymore. I work part-time at a different grocery store now, but mostly I watch Zoe. I make sure she's kind to other children. I make sure she never hits anyone, never loses her temper, never does anything that might bring the basket woman back. Because I understand now what Tyler figured out in that bathroom. Some children can't be saved by love and patience and understanding. Some children require harsher lessons. And something ancient still walks the forests of Oregon, making sure those lessons get taught. The most horrifying part isn't that the basket woman exists. It's that part of me. The part that remembers Tyler hurting that squirrel, pushing Miguel toward the cliff. The part that sees troubled kids in my checkout line and wonders what their parents have given up on. Part of me understands why she does what she does. There are children society has already written off. Children whose own mothers don't come to field trips. Children who hurt others without remorse. And when schools fail, when families fail, when therapy fails, something older than Oregon itself is still willing to intervene. Tyler walked into that basket because he knew what he was. And maybe, that basket was the only teacher left who could reach him. I saved my daughter by sacrificing someone else's child. I'll live with that choice for the rest of my life. But late at night, when I hear Zoe whimper in her sleep, I wonder if what I really saved was worth the price I paid. The basket woman is still out there, still collecting Oregon's unwanted children, still teaching the lessons that no one else wants to teach. And sometimes when I see the way Zoe flinches now when she gets even slightly frustrated, I wonder who really got taken that day. Because the daughter sleeping next to me isn't the same girl who went to Multnomah Falls. That girl is gone forever, replaced by someone who's learned to be good through terror instead of love. Maybe that's the real horror of the basket woman. She doesn't just take the broken children, she breaks the ones she leaves behind. My name is Detective Laura Vance. I spent 18 years with Coos County Sheriff's Department investigating deaths that other detectives couldn't explain. Drownings in dry places, bodies found where they shouldn't exist. Cases that violated everything I knew about how people die. But nothing prepared me for what I discovered about Face Rock Beach in February 2023. What happened there didn't just challenge my understanding of death. It forced me to confront the truth about my own daughter's drowning 8 years earlier, and the ancient Coquille legend that my ex-wife tried to warn me about before our marriage fell apart. This is the true story of Princess Iwana's curse, the ocean demon Sayatka, and how a mother's guilt became the key to stopping a supernatural killing cycle that has claimed lives for over 50 years. The call came at 5:43 a.m. on February 14th. Marcus Holland, 39 years old, found dead in room 237 of the Bandon Beach Motel. Apparent drowning. The responding officer's voice was shaky when he called it in. "Detective Vance, you need to see this. The bathroom is completely dry, but this guy drowned. His lungs are full of salt water." I'd worked these impossible cases before. That's why they called me. In 18 years of law enforcement, I'd seen 7 cases of people drowning in places with no water. Each time, the victim had visited Face Rock within 48 hours of death. Face Rock is Oregon's most photographed natural landmark, a massive stone formation rising from the Pacific, shaped like a woman's face in profile. Every year, tens of thousands of tourists stop at the scenic viewpoint to take pictures. Most leave with pretty photos and sunburn. Some don't leave at all. I arrived at the motel at 6:15 a.m. Marcus Holland lay on the bathroom floor, fully clothed, surrounded by dry tile. No puddles, no wet towels. The shower hadn't been used. I could tell from the soap scum patterns and dust on the faucet handles. But Marcus's clothing was soaked with salt water, and his lungs contained 3 liters of ocean water that shouldn't exist. His wife Sarah was sedated in the lobby, repeating the same phrase over and over. He just wanted a picture of the rock. Just one picture for his mother. Marcus's phone was still in his pocket. I scrolled through his photos from the previous day. Dozens of shots of Face Rock from every angle. But something was wrong with the last photo, taken at 4:17 p.m. yesterday. The rock formation's mouth was wide open, screaming. I've lived on the Oregon coast my entire life. I've seen Face Rock thousands of times in every weather condition. The mouth is always a subtle indentation, barely noticeable unless you're looking for it. It doesn't change expression. Rock doesn't work that way. But Marcus's photo showed the stone mouth gaping open in what looked like anguish or terror. I drove straight to the beach to compare the photo with reality. The actual rock formation showed its normal, peaceful expression, lips slightly parted, as if the stone princess were sleeping. I took my own photos with the same phone settings Marcus had used. Every shot showed the calm, familiar face I'd known since childhood. Standing there on the sand, staring at that ancient stone formation, I felt something cold settle in my stomach, because I'd seen a screaming Face Rock before, 8 years ago, in my daughter's photos, the day before she drowned. Maya's death destroyed my marriage. My ex-wife Jennifer blamed me for working too much, for not watching our daughter closely enough during our family beach trip. I blamed Jennifer for drinking too much that weekend, for falling asleep on the beach while our 16-year-old was swimming alone. The official report called it accidental drowning. Maya was found in 3 feet of water, but the autopsy showed her lungs contained salt water from 800-foot depth, water that couldn't exist where she drowned. The Coast Guard called it an impossible finding and ruled it an anomaly in their report. I never questioned it. I wanted the case closed. I wanted to stop thinking about the day I lost everything. But sitting in my patrol car outside the Face Rock parking area, I opened the evidence file I'd kept hidden in my home office for 8 years. Maya's cell phone was still in the plastic bag, along with her clothes and jewelry. I'd never been able to throw it away. I turned on the phone and navigated to her photos from August 15, 2015, the day before she died. 17 pictures of Face Rock, taken during our family vacation. The first 16 showed the normal, peaceful stone face. The 17th photo, taken at 6:23 p.m., showed Face Rock's mouth wide open in a silent scream, identical to Marcus Holland's photo. Maya drowned 12 hours later. I spent the next 3 days buried in case files, searching for similar patterns. What I found changed everything I thought I knew about my job, my daughter's death, and the true danger hidden in Oregon's most beloved natural landmark. Since 1970, 47 tourists had drowned at Face Rock Beach under impossible circumstances. All had taken photos of the rock formation within 48 hours of death. All were ruled accidental drownings despite evidence that violated basic physics. More disturbing was the timeline pattern. The deaths didn't occur randomly. They came in clusters. 5 to 8 deaths within a few months, then nothing for years, then another cluster, like something was feeding in cycles. Marcus Holland was the third death since September 2022. According to the pattern, we were entering another active cycle. I needed answers that official reports couldn't provide. I needed to call someone I hadn't spoken to in 6 years. Jennifer answered on the 4th ring. Laura. Her voice carried 6 years of unresolved anger. I need to ask you about Face Rock, I said. About the Coquille legends your grandmother used to tell. Long silence. Which drowning case are you working on now? How did you? Because you only call me when someone dies at that beach in a way that doesn't make sense to your detective brain. Let me guess. Tourist, took photos of the rock, drowned somewhere with no water? I felt that familiar knot in my stomach. Jennifer, I found Maya's photos from that day. Her last picture shows the rock with its mouth open, screaming, the same expression that Marcus Holland photographed before he died. Another silence, longer this time. When Jennifer spoke again, her voice was different, scared. You need to come to the reservation, tonight. And Laura, bring Maya's phone. My grandmother needs to see those photos. Jennifer lived on the Coquille River Reservation with her new family. Her grandmother, Agnes Whitefeather, was 93 years old and one of the last fluent speakers of the Coquille language. She'd been trying to warn people about Face Rock for decades, but the tribal council had stopped her from speaking publicly about it after tourism complaints. Agnes examined Maya's photos on an old laptop, speaking rapidly in Coquille while Jennifer translated. She says the screaming face means Siatka is waking up, Jennifer said. That's the ocean demon imprisoned beneath Face Rock. According to our legends, Princess Iwana sacrificed herself thousands of years ago to trap Siatka under the stone. But the prison isn't permanent. Agnes continued speaking, pointing at Maya's photo and then at Marcus's. Every person who touches Face Rock weakens Iwana's seal, Jennifer translated. The demon can influence people to take photos when the seal is nearly broken, making the rock appear to scream. It's a warning. After 10 people touch the rock during a weakening cycle, Siatka breaks free completely. I felt sick. How many people have touched it in this cycle? Jennifer asked her grandmother in Coquille. Agnes held up 7 fingers. 7 people. 3 are dead. That means 4 more will die before Siatka emerges completely. Unless what? unless someone who helped weaken the seal performs the guardian ritual. They have to take Ioana's place as the prison keeper. They have to die willingly to strengthen the seal. Agnes spoke again, looking directly at me. She says you qualify for the ritual. Jennifer translated quietly. Because your investigation will bring attention to the beach. More tourists, more people touching the rock. And because your daughter was killed by Siatka. The demon is connected to your bloodline now. I stared at this 93-year-old woman who was calmly explaining that I was destined to drown myself to stop an ancient monster. There has to be another way. Agnes shook her head and spoke one word. Wa Nashi. Guardian's death, Jennifer whispered. It's the only way to reset the seal. Spent that night researching the historical drowning patterns, looking for any case where the cycle was broken without reaching 10 deaths. I found none. Every cluster ended with exactly 10 victims, followed by years of safety, then another cluster beginning. The pattern was perfect, mechanical, supernatural. At 3:17 a.m., my phone rang. Another drowning. Rachel Kim, 28, found dead in her car in a McDonald's parking lot 40 miles inland. Her car was dry, doors locked from the inside, but she'd drowned in salt water. Her phone contained 17 photos of face rock, taken the previous afternoon. That made 4 deaths. 6 more people would die unless I acted. I drove to Face Rock at dawn, trying to understand how the ritual was supposed to work. The beach was empty except for a few early joggers who ignored the massive stone formation rising from the waves. Face Rock stood about 80 feet offshore, accessible only at the lowest tides. According to Jennifer's translation of her grandmother's instructions, the guardian ritual required the chosen person to wade out to the rock during high tide and maintain physical contact until drowning was complete. The dying person's life force would strengthen Ioana's seal, preventing Siatka's escape for another generation. I was measuring the distance to the rock when my phone rang. It was my chief. Vance, we've got a media situation. Some blogger posted about the Face Rock curse and it's gone viral on social media. We've got news vans heading to Bandon and thousands of people driving down from Portland wanting to see the cursed beach. My blood turned to ice. My investigation had made everything worse. By documenting the pattern and asking questions, I'd created exactly the kind of attention that would bring more tourists to touch the rock. I'd accelerated the timeline myself. By noon, Face Rock Beach was packed with tourists, families taking selfies, teenagers filming TikTok videos, hundreds of people wading out at low tide to touch the famous rock formation and pose for photos. Every touch weakened Ioana's seal further. I called Jennifer from my patrol car, watching the circus unfold. It's happening faster now. All these people touching the rock. How does that affect the timeline? Agnes says the seal is breaking exponentially now. Instead of 10 people over months, it might be 10 people over days, maybe hours. As if summoned by her words, my radio crackled. All units, we have a drowning at Brookings Harbor. Victim found dead in a public restroom, apparent saltwater drowning. 5th death. Daniel Morrison, 34, had driven down from Portland that morning specifically to see the cursed beach. His Instagram account showed him posing with Face Rock at 11:45 a.m. He died in a men's restroom stall at 12:30 p.m., 45 minutes later, and 3 miles inland. By evening, the beach was still crowded. Local news crews interviewing tourists. Social media influencers live streaming from the rock formation. Kids daring each other to swim out and touch the cursed stone. Agnes Whitefeather arrived at the beach at sunset, supported by Jennifer and 2 other tribal elders. She spoke to me in English for the first time. "Detective Vance, Your people broke the sacred boundary. Now you must repair it. Tonight, before more die. How do I know the ritual will work? Agnes smiled sadly. Because Iwana was a mother too. She protected her children. You protect yours now. At 9:47 p.m., my radio reported the sixth death. Amanda Torres, 19, drowned in a hotel swimming pool in Gold Beach. The pool contained salt water that tested positive for deep ocean minerals found only below 2,000 feet. 4 more deaths would free Siatka completely. Based on the accelerating timeline, I estimated 6 hours before the 10th victim died. I had until dawn to perform the guardian ritual. I spent my last night writing letters. One to my chief, explaining the true nature of the Face Rock deaths and requesting that Detective Morris continue monitoring the beach for future supernatural activity. One to my sister, asking her to care for my affairs and donate my belongings to charity. The hardest letter was to Maya. I wrote about the 8 years of guilt I'd carried, believing I'd failed to protect her. About the marriage that ended because neither Jennifer nor I could accept that our daughter had died for reasons beyond our control. About how I'd spent 8 years trying to solve impossible cases because I couldn't solve the one that mattered most. I wrote that I finally understood what really happened to her, and that I was going to make sure it never happened to anyone else's child. At 4:30 a.m., I met Jennifer and Agnes at Face Rock Beach. The tribal elders had performed a protection ceremony, creating a circle of burning sage and cedar around the shoreline. Agnes gave me specific instructions for the ritual. I had to wade out to Face Rock during high tide and maintain skin contact with the stone until my death was complete. My life force would merge with Iwana's spirit, creating a stronger seal that would hold for generations. The most important part, I had to choose death willingly. If I struggled or tried to save myself, the ritual would fail and Siatka would emerge anyway. Agnes painted traditional symbols on my forehead with red ochre. Jennifer hugged me goodbye, whispering an apology for all the years of anger between us. "Tell Maya I kept my promise," I said. I became the hero she thought I was. At 5:15 a.m., I waded into the Pacific Ocean wearing civilian clothes. The water was 54 degrees and pitch black under the starless sky. High tide meant Face Rock was surrounded by 8 feet of churning seawater. The swim to the rock took 12 minutes, fighting the current, dodging submerged obstacles, struggling against waves that wanted to push me back to shore. By the time I reached Face Rock, I was exhausted and numb from the cold. I placed both hands flat against the stone surface and immediately felt something impossible, warmth radiating from the rock, as if something alive lived inside it. That's when Face Rock began to change. The stone features shifted beneath my palms. Princess Iwana's carved face became 3-dimensional, moving like living flesh. She opened eyes that glowed with soft blue light and spoke without moving her lips, her voice echoing inside my head. "Thank you for coming, Guardian. I have been alone for so long." "How long have you been here?" "Time moves differently in the stone prison. I have felt every death, every tourist who touched our rock and weakened my strength. I have tried to warn them through photographs, but fear only makes them curious." Beneath us, the ocean began to churn violently. Something massive was rising from the seafloor, angry at being denied its full emergence. "Siatka knows you are here. He will try to stop the ritual. You must hold on until the binding is complete, no matter what he shows you." The water around Face Rock turned black as ink. Tentacles thicker than tree trunks erupted from the depths, followed by a head the size of a shipping container. Siatka was part octopus, part shark, part something that had never been natural. Dozens of human arms and faces protruded from his body, the absorbed souls of everyone he'd killed over the centuries. I saw Maya's face among them, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth moving soundlessly. "It is not her," Ioana warned. "He uses the forms of loved ones to break your resolve." Siatka wrapped tentacles around my waist and legs, trying to pull me away from the rock. I held on, feeling my fingers slip on the wet stone. The demon spoke with Maya's voice. "Mom, let go. It hurts, please stop. Please don't leave me here." Every maternal instinct screamed at me to let go, to save my daughter from this monster. But I remembered Agnes Whitefeather's warning. Siatka would use my love against me. "You're not Maya," I gasped, blood running from my mouth where Siatka's crushing grip had broken ribs. "My daughter is safe. She's free. You're just wearing her face." Siatka's roar shook the ocean floor. He squeezed tighter, and I felt my sternum crack. But I kept my hands on face rock, feeling Ioana's warmth flowing through the stone. "The binding begins now. Your death will create the new prison. Do not let go." Blue light erupted from face rock, spreading through the water like liquid electricity. Siatka screamed with the voices of 100 drowned souls as chains of light wrapped around his massive form, dragging him back toward the seafloor. The demon released me to fight against the binding magic, but it was too late. The blue chains pulled him down into a crack that opened in the ocean floor, sealing him in a deeper prison than before. I felt my life force flowing out through my hands, merging with the stone, becoming part of Ioana's eternal watch. My lungs filled with salt water, but I no longer needed to breathe. I was becoming something beyond human death. "Welcome, Sister Guardian. We will watch over the beach together now." Jennifer and the tribal elders pulled my body to shore at dawn. According to the coroner's report, I died of drowning combined with massive internal trauma, but somehow survived long enough to complete the ritual despite injuries that should have killed me instantly. No more drownings occurred at Face Rock Beach after that morning. The case was officially closed as Detective Laura Vance died in an accident during an unauthorized investigation. They gave me a posthumous Medal of Honor. But the real truth is preserved in Coquille oral tradition. Agnes Whitefeather added my name to the story of Princess Ioana, calling me the second guardian who strengthened the ancient seal. If you visit Face Rock today, look carefully at the stone formation during certain tide conditions and lighting angles. You'll see two faces carved in the rock: Princess Ioana's peaceful profile and my own determined expression watching over the beach. Jennifer visits my memorial plaque every month, bringing flowers and updates about her family. She tells me Maya appears in her dreams now, no longer the scared child who drowned, but a grown woman at peace, grateful that her mother finally understood the truth and chose to protect other families. The Face Rock curse has ended, but the price was everything I had to give. Some legends can only be stopped by becoming part of them. Ioana and I keep our vigil together now, two mothers standing guard against the darkness beneath the waves, ensuring that no more children will be taken by Siatka's hunger. The beach is safe. The families are protected. The ancient contract between the living and the supernatural has been renewed. Sometimes love requires the ultimate sacrifice. Sometimes being a hero means accepting that the story ends with your death. But the protection continues forever. Based on true Coquille tribal legends of Princess Ioana and the Face Rock Formation near Bandon, Oregon. While supernatural elements are fictional, the cultural traditions and geographic details are accurately researched and presented with respect for Native American heritage. My name is Dr. Rachel Ortiz, and I've been a marine biologist for 9 years. I specialize in invasive aquatic species, the kind of fish and creatures that show up where they don't belong and destroy entire ecosystems. I've tracked Burmese pythons through Florida swamplands, netted zebra mussels from Lake Superior, and documented lionfish invasions across the Caribbean. I thought there wasn't a water-based mystery I couldn't solve with science and determination. But what I discovered at Wallowa Lake in August 2023 wasn't an invasive species at all. It was something that had been waiting in those dark waters since before my ancestors ever set foot in Oregon. Something the Nez Perce have known about for over 1,000 years. Something they call Walichu, the water devil that feeds on the living. This is that story. And I'm telling it now because the juveniles are almost grown, and people need to know what's coming. The call from Oregon Fish and Wildlife came on a Tuesday morning in late July. My supervisor, Dr. Marcus Webb, sounded rattled, unusual for a man who dealt with everything from toxic algae blooms to escaped exotic pets. "Rachel, I need you in Eastern Oregon ASAP. We've got a situation at Wallowa Lake. Rancher named Tom Fisher has lost 14 head of cattle in 3 weeks. All found dead near the shoreline, all completely drained of blood. Bite marks show something with 4-inch teeth arranged in a perfect circle." I packed my standard field kit, underwater cameras with motion sensors, portable sonar equipment, dive gear rated for 200 feet, water quality testing tools, and specimen collection containers. The 6-hour drive through the Cascade Mountains gave me time to review what little I knew about Wallowa Lake. At 283 feet deep, it's Oregon's deepest natural lake, formed by glacial activity over 10,000 years ago. The water stays cold year-round due to underground springs, and local Nez Perce legends claimed it was bottomless. Tom Fisher met me at his ranch house overlooking the lake. He was a third-generation cattle rancher, weathered hands telling the story of 40 years working this land. His property stretched right down to the shoreline, where his Angus cattle had grazed safely for decades. "Lost another one last night," he said, leading me down to the water's edge. 1,200-pound bull named Kaiser, meanest animal I ever owned. Found him this morning, 30 feet into the lake. The drag marks in the soft earth were unlike anything I'd encountered. Deep gouges where something incredibly powerful had pulled a massive animal toward the water. But these weren't claw marks. They were smooth, like something had wrapped around the bull and dragged it. "Mr. Fisher, what kind of predators do you normally deal with out here?" "Mountain lions, black bears occasionally, but nothing that could take down Kaiser. That bull once charged my F-150 and dented the bumper." I examined the carcass they'd managed to winch back to shore using Tom's tractor. The bite pattern was perfectly circular, about 18 inches across, with puncture wounds showing teeth roughly 4 inches long. But what concerned me most was the blood, or lack thereof. The wounds hadn't clotted properly. Whatever had bitten this animal produced some kind of anticoagulant that prevented normal blood coagulation. "Dr. Ortiz," Tom called from near his truck, "I want you to meet Joseph Red Thunder. His family's worked this land longer than mine has owned it." Joseph was Nez Perce, probably in his early 60s, with silver hair braided down his back and eyes that seemed to see more than they revealed. He'd been watching me examine the carcass with obvious concern. "You're a scientist," Joseph said. It wasn't a question. "Marine biologist. I study aquatic invasive species." Joseph looked out at the lake, then back at me. "My great-grandfather told me stories about Wallowa Lake. His great-grandfather told him. Stories that go back 30 generations. We call it Walichu. the water devil that sleeps in the deep caves and wakes every 30 years to feed. I nodded politely. Mr. Red Thunder, every deep lake has monster legends, but I need to find the actual creature responsible for these cattle deaths. Any ideas what it might actually be? Joseph's expression grew serious. Dr. Ortiz, my people have documented every breeding cycle for over 1,000 years. 1993, 1963, 1933, 1903, going back 30 generations. Every time people disappear, animals die, then it sleeps again for 30 years. He paused. 2023 is a breeding year. The Walichu is awake and it's hungry. That evening I set up my base camp on Tom's private dock. The lake was mirror still, reflecting stars that seemed to pulse in the dark water. I deployed 6 underwater cameras at strategic depths, 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, and 280 feet. The deepest camera took nearly 30 minutes to reach bottom. My first sonar sweep revealed something remarkable. At 275 feet, massive cavern systems connected to underground river networks that extended for miles in every direction. These submerged caves could explain how an unusual species might have accessed what appeared to be a completely landlocked lake. The initial footage from my cameras came back around 2 a.m. The 150-foot camera had captured something swimming past. A serpentine body easily 20 feet long with 6 paddle-like appendages along its sides. The anatomy was wrong for any eel species I knew about. But what really caught my attention were the bioluminescent patches along its flanks, pulsing in rhythmic patterns. Freshwater bioluminescence was extremely rare outside of certain deep cave systems. I spent the next day analyzing the footage frame by frame. The creature's eyes faced forward like a mammalian predator, rather than to the sides like most fish. Its movement patterns showed intelligence. It had clearly noticed my camera and was investigating it systematically. On my third day, the 50-foot camera captured a feeding event that made my blood run cold. A mule deer had come down to drink at dawn. The attack lasted exactly 8 seconds. The creature's jaw unfolded in 3 distinct sections, revealing rotating rows of teeth that grabbed the deer and dragged it underwater before the animal could even cry out. I managed to collect a tissue sample from the deer carcass before it sank completely. Under my portable microscope, the tissue showed something fascinating and terrifying. The same anticoagulant enzyme I'd found in the cattle wounds. But this wasn't just saliva. The tissue itself was saturated with a clear, viscous substance that seemed to preserve cellular structure while preventing decomposition. That night changed everything. I was working on my laptop, analyzing water samples, when something massive struck the dock pilings beneath me. The entire structure shuddered like it had been hit by a boat. But there was no boat. The water around the dock began glowing with spiral patterns of blue light that pulsed in mathematical rhythm. The creature was directly underneath me, and I realized it wasn't just hunting. It was studying me. I quickly deployed a hydrophone to record any underwater sounds. What I heard through my headphones made me question everything I thought I knew about aquatic intelligence. Complex clicking patterns, like cetacean communication, but with mathematical precision that suggested language rather than simple echolocation. The bioluminescent display continued for over an hour. Spirals that shifted into geometric patterns, then into what looked almost like symbols. This wasn't random. The creature was attempting to communicate. The next morning, I made the decision that nearly cost me my life. I had to get direct footage of this entity. I suited up with my diving equipment and prepared for a 180-foot descent, ignoring every safety protocol I'd ever learned. I should have had a dive partner, proper decompression planning, and emergency backup. But Tom was losing cattle every few nights, and I needed answers. The descent through Wallowa Lake's thermoclines was like traveling through different worlds. At 130 feet, the water temperature dropped from 58°F to 38°F in just 10 feet. Visibility diminished to less than 5 feet, but I continued down following my depth gauge. At 170 feet, I found it, the entrance to an underwater cave system large enough to accommodate a freight train. The walls showed scrape marks from something repeatedly entering and exiting, grooves worn smooth by decades or centuries of use. Inside the cave, my high-powered LED lights revealed a scene from a nightmare. The floor was carpeted with bones, cattle skulls, deer antlers, elk rib cages, and scattered throughout human skulls. I counted at least 20 human remains of various ages. Some bones were yellowed with age, others looked disturbingly recent. But then I saw something that nearly made me drop my regulator in shock. In a side chamber deeper in the cave, there was a living human being. He was a man, probably in his early 40s, suspended in some kind of clear, gel-like substance that covered his entire body. He couldn't move his limbs, but his eyes tracked my movement. He was conscious, alert, aware, paralyzed but completely cognizant of his situation. I swam closer and recognized the same viscous secretion I'd found on the deer tissue. This creature wasn't just killing its prey. It was preserving them alive using some kind of biological anesthetic that paralyzed motor function while maintaining consciousness. Fresh meat that stayed fresh because it was still technically alive. Water movement behind me indicated something large entering the cave. I turned and saw the Walichu in its full, impossible glory. 24 feet of serpentine muscle with a body like a massive eel, but equipped with 6 powerful flippers and a head that defied classification. Its face combined eel-like features with something almost human, intelligent eyes that fixed on me with obvious recognition, and what I can only describe as curiosity. I watched in frozen horror as it approached the paralyzed man. Its jaw began to unfold in 3 sections like some biomechanical mechanism, revealing multiple rows of rotating teeth that moved independently of each other. The creature began methodically scraping flesh from the man's leg while he remained conscious and aware, his eyes wide with silent agony. It fed for several minutes, then swam away, leaving him alive for the next feeding. When the creature had departed, the man managed to mouth words to me through the paralytic substance. "Kill the eggs only way." He directed my attention with his eyes toward an even deeper section of the cave. Following his gaze, I discovered the breeding chamber. Dozens of leathery eggs the size of footballs lined the cave walls, pulsing with internal movement. Several had already hatched, and I watched in revulsion as juvenile Walichu, already 3 feet long, emerged from the shells. The horrible truth hit me like ice water. This wasn't an invasive species that had somehow reached Wallowa Lake. This was an ancient native species that had been here for millennia. The Nez Perce legends weren't mythology. They were historical documentation of a breeding cycle that had been repeating for over 1,000 years. The paralyzed man, I later learned his name was Tyler Webb, a marine geologist who disappeared while hiking in May, suddenly grabbed my dive knife from my equipment belt. Using what little motor function he had retained, he managed to cut deeply into his own throat, filling the water around us with clouds of blood. The adult Walichu returned immediately, drawn by the blood scent. While it focused on Tyler's self-sacrifice, I had a narrow window to escape. I swam for the cave exit as fast as my equipment would allow. The creature noticed my departure and began pursuit. It moved through the water faster than anything that size should be physically capable of achieving. I could sense it closing the distance behind me. In desperation, I abandoned every decompression protocol and surfaced from 170 feet in under 2 minutes. The nitrogen bubbles forming in my bloodstream should have killed me instantly, but pure terror overrode my body's normal limitations. I reached the dock just as the Walichu rammed the pilings with enough force to collapse the entire structure. I fell back into the water, and its 3-part jaw opened inches from my face. I could see the mechanical precision of those rotating teeth, smell the decay from its feeding chamber. Suddenly, rifle shots echoed across the lake. Joseph Red Thunder stood on the shore with a .30-06, firing repeatedly into the water near the creature. He wasn't trying to hit it. The bullets were creating enough noise and water displacement to drive it back to the depths. Joseph pulled me to shore while I vomited from severe decompression sickness. My joints were swelling. Nitrogen bubbles were forming under my skin, and I was barely conscious. The next 12 hours are a blur of helicopter transport and emergency medical treatment. At the hyperbaric chamber in Boise, doctors told me I shouldn't have survived that ascent, but surviving was just the beginning of my problems. Dr. Webb arrived at the hospital 2 days later with a complete video analysis team. I showed him the underwater footage. Hours of documentation including Tyler Webb being consumed alive while fully conscious. Webb watched the entire recording without changing expression. When it ended, he closed my laptop and looked at me with eyes I'd never seen before. "Rachel, this footage never existed. You were investigating routine cattle predation, found evidence of a small population of escaped alligator gar, and recommended standard fish population control measures. Marcus, there are dozens of juvenile Walichu in that breeding chamber right now. In 5 years, they'll be adults. This lake will become a hunting ground for 40 of these creatures. You'll sign a non-disclosure agreement stating that your investigation found no evidence of unusual aquatic species. Oregon Fish and Wildlife will handle any follow-up internally. And if I refuse, then you'll lose your professional license, your security clearance, and any chance of working in marine biology again. You'll also face federal charges for falsifying scientific reports." They confiscated every piece of equipment I'd brought: cameras, computers, sample containers, even my personal diving gear. The NDA I was forced to sign was 30 pages long and covered not just my findings, but any discussion of Wallowa Lake, the Fisher Ranch, or anything related to my investigation. But I had anticipated this possibility. Before showing Webb my footage, I had secreted tissue samples from both the deer carcass and the paralytic substance coating Tyler Webb. I mailed these samples to genetics laboratories in different states using false names and fabricated research purposes. The results that came back 3 weeks later were impossible. Unknown species showing DNA markers from hagfish, lamprey, and mammalian sources. Genetic structure suggests species predating most modern fish families by millions of years. Recommend immediate contamination retest as these results are biologically impossible. I sent samples to a second laboratory. Same results with an additional note. If these findings are accurate, this represents a living fossil that should have gone extinct during the Devonian period. Evolutionary impossibility. I reached out to Joseph Red Thunder through intermediaries. We met secretly at a diner in La Grande, where he shared the complete Nez Perce oral history of the Walichu. "My people have kept records for 30 generations," Joseph explained. "The breeding cycle is precise. Every 30 years, always. 1993 was the last time. 6 people disappeared that summer. 1963 before that, 8 missing. 1933, 12 vanished. The pattern goes back to the 1700s in our written records, much further in oral tradition." "Why every 30 years?" "The young ones take that long to mature. When they're ready to breed, They hunt aggressively to build up fat reserves. After mating, the adults go into deep hibernation in the cave systems. The juveniles scatter to other lakes through underground rivers until their time comes. Joseph showed me tribal documentation, maps marking disappearances, ceremonial records of years when the lake was declared off-limits, even photographs from the 1960s showing what tribal elders claimed were juvenile walichu in other eastern Oregon lakes. 2023 is a major breeding year, Joseph continued. Based on the traditional cycles, this generation will produce more offspring than usual. My great-grandfather's records show this happens every sixth cycle, roughly every 180 years. The last time was 1843. 17 people disappeared that year. I returned to my research with new urgency. Using historical records from newspapers, police reports, and missing persons databases, I documented the pattern Joseph had described. Every 30 years since the 1850s, Eastern Oregon experienced a cluster of unexplained disappearances centered around deep lakes. But when I tried to publish these findings, I hit a wall of institutional resistance. Scientific journals rejected my papers as unsupported speculation. The Oregon Historical Society refused to include my research in their archives. Even cryptozoology publications dismissed my work as obvious hoax material. My professional reputation disintegrated rapidly. Oregon Fish and Wildlife terminated my consulting contracts. Universities where I had applied for research positions suddenly found reasons to reject my applications. Word had spread through the marine biology community that Dr. Rachel Ortiz had suffered some kind of breakdown and was no longer reliable. So I made a decision that saved my sanity and possibly my life. I moved to Wallowa Lake permanently. I found work at Fisher's Corner Store, the only gas station and supply shop serving the lake area. Tom Fisher had quietly put in a good word for me, understanding that I was the only person who truly knew what had killed his cattle. The job provided basic income and perfect cover for maintaining surveillance of the lake. Over the next 8 months, I documented everything. 4 tourists disappeared while swimming in the lake during peak summer season. All were ruled drowning accidents despite the fact that 3 were experienced swimmers and 1 was a former Navy SEAL. No bodies were ever recovered. I maintained hidden camera stations around the lake perimeter and collected tissue samples whenever I found partially consumed animal carcasses. The evidence was overwhelming. Juvenile walichu were actively hunting in progressively shallower water as they grew larger and more confident. By December 2023, I had identified at least 15 distinct individuals ranging from 4 feet to 8 feet in length. They were growing rapidly and becoming increasingly bold in their hunting behavior. The breaking point came on New Year's Eve. A family from Portland, the Kowalskis, had rented a cabin on the lake for winter vacation. Their 12-year-old daughter Emma was playing on the frozen shoreline when the ice gave way near a natural spring that kept one section from freezing completely. I was working late inventory at the store when I heard the screaming. By the time I reached the lake, Emma's parents were frantically pointing at the water where she had disappeared. The father, David Kowalski, was preparing to dive in after his daughter. I tackled him before he could enter the water. "You can't go in there," I shouted over their panic. "That's not a drowning." Through the clear winter water, we could all see what was happening 15 feet below the surface. A juvenile walichu, now nearly 10 feet long, had Emma wrapped in its coils. But she wasn't being killed. She was being paralyzed and transported toward the deeper sections of the lake. David Kowalski broke free from my grip and dove into the water before I could stop him. I watched helplessly as a second, larger juvenile approached from below. This one had to be at least 12 feet long. The attack was swift and precise. The larger Walichu's three-part jaw unfolded and clamped down on David's torso. Within seconds, he was being dragged toward the cave system, leaving a trail of blood that quickly dispersed in the current. Emma's mother, Sarah, was beyond hysteria. Called 911, but I knew search and rescue would find nothing. The lake was too deep, the cave system too vast, and the Walichu too intelligent to leave evidence. When emergency responders arrived, I stuck to the official story. Tragic accident, thin ice, 2 drowning victims. The dive recovery team spent 3 days searching and found nothing. David and Emma Kowalski became statistics in the growing list of Wallowa Lake drowning victims. But I had captured everything on my hidden cameras. The footage showed not just the attack, but the aftermath. Both David and Emma had been taken to the feeding chambers alive. The paralytic coating would keep them conscious but immobile for weeks or months while they were slowly consumed. That night, I made copies of everything. 24 months of video evidence, tissue samples, genetic analysis reports, historical documentation, and Joseph Red Thunder's tribal records. I distributed these copies to secure locations across 3 states. Because the juveniles are almost mature now, and the next breeding cycle is only 5 years away. Today, in March 2024, I've identified over 20 individual Walichu in Wallowa Lake, ranging from 8 feet to 15 feet in length. They're hunting in water as shallow as 30 feet, and their bioluminescent communication patterns have become more complex and frequent. Joseph Red Thunder died last month. Natural causes, but his timing troubles me. Before he passed, he shared one final piece of tribal knowledge that keeps me awake at night. The 180-year cycle isn't just about breeding, he told me. It's about expansion. When the population gets large enough, the young ones don't just scatter to other lakes. They start establishing new colonies. 1843 was when the Walichu first appeared in Crater Lake, Clear Lake, and Diamond Lake. 2023 marks the beginning of the next expansion cycle. I've been monitoring reports from across eastern and central Oregon. Unexplained livestock deaths near Crater Lake, missing swimmers at Clear Lake, strange sonar readings in Diamond Lake that fish and wildlife officials can't explain. The expansion has already begun. I'm telling this story now because the cover-up is starting to fracture. There are too many disappearances, too many questions, too many families demanding real answers. Social media is spreading rumors faster than officials can suppress them. Amateur photographers are capturing images that are harder to dismiss. The truth about the Walichu is going to come out, whether the authorities want it to or not. When it does, I want people to understand that these creatures aren't invaders or anomalies. They're ancient natives of Oregon's waters, and we've been sharing this land with them for thousands of years without realizing it. The Nez Perce knew how to coexist with the Walichu. They understood the cycles, respected the boundaries, and stayed away from deep waters during breeding. Years. But European settlers dismissed indigenous knowledge as superstition, and we've been paying for that arrogance ever since. Now, as I write this in my small apartment above Fisher's Corner store, I can see juvenile Walichu hunting in the moonlight, 15-foot shadows moving just beneath the surface, their bioluminescent patches creating patterns that look almost like writing. They know I'm watching. They've always known. Sometimes on calm nights, I think they're trying to communicate with me. The same mathematical patterns Joseph described from tribal ceremonies, the same geometric sequences that his ancestors said represented warnings or territorial boundaries. But I don't speak their language, and they seem to understand that my species has forgotten how to listen. The adult Walichu will wake from hibernation in 2028, ready for the next breeding cycle. By then, there will be 60 to 80 mature individuals in Wallowa Lake alone, plus expanding colonies in at least 6 other Oregon lakes. The 2028 breeding cycle will be the largest in recorded history, and unless something changes dramatically in how we acknowledge and prepare for this reality, it's going to be a feeding frenzy that no government agency will be able to hide. I've done everything I can to warn people. I've documented everything, preserved evidence, and built a network of contacts who understand the truth. Now I'm just the woman who works at the gas station by the lake where monsters live. But I'm still watching, still documenting, still preparing. Because the Walichu aren't just Oregon's oldest predators. They're its rightful owners, and they want their territory back. My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez, and I've been an emergency room doctor for 14 years. I work at St. Anthony Hospital in Pendleton, Oregon. I thought I'd seen everything: overdoses, car wrecks, domestic violence, farm accidents. But I was wrong. What happened in September 2023 wasn't just a medical emergency. It was the return of something that's been hunting people in eastern Oregon for thousands of years. Something my grandmother warned me about when I was little before I stopped believing in old stories. You see, I'm half Umatilla. My grandmother, Maria Minthorn, used to tell me stories about the Chawit, the crawler. Back then, I thought they were just scary bedtime stories. When I became a doctor, I put away childish fears. I believed in science, in medicine, in things I could prove. I should have listened to her. It started on September 3rd with Brad Collins. His hunting buddies carried him into my ER around 2 a.m., unconscious and burning with fever. Brad was 38 years old, a regular patient I'd treated for minor injuries before. Good guy, coached Little League, worked construction. He was fine 6 hours ago, his friend Kyle said, voice shaking. Just got scratched by a tree branch during our elk hunt up in the Blues. Now look at him. I looked at Brad's arm, 4 parallel scratches, about 3 inches long, but something made my stomach drop. The spacing was too perfect, too deliberate. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. The crawler leaves 4 marks, Mija, like fingers, but not human fingers. I pushed the thought away. I'm a doctor. I deal in facts. The wound was infected, red, swollen, hot to the touch. But the infection was wrong. Black lines spread under his skin like dark veins, moving from the scratch toward his heart. And I could watch them move in real time, pulsing like a second heartbeat. Brad's vitals were terrifying. Temperature 104 degrees, heart rate 140, blood pressure crashing. He was going into septic shock from an infection that had started just 6 hours ago. In 14 years of emergency medicine, I'd never seen sepsis progress that fast. I cleaned the wound and found something that made my hands shake. Tiny white threads, about 2 millimeters long, moving independently in the wound like microscopic snakes. When I touched them with forceps, they tried to burrow deeper into Brad's flesh. The crawler plants seeds, Mija. They grow inside you until you're not you anymore. Stop it, Elena. Focus on the patient. I extracted several threads with my forceps and placed them in a specimen cup. They continued writhing, trying to escape, trying to return to Brad's skin. I'd never seen any parasite behave like this. Then Brad started seizing. He vomited black fluid that smelled like rotting earth. His pupils dilated until his eyes were completely black. No iris, no white, just endless dark. And he started speaking. It wasn't English. It wasn't Spanish. It was Sahaptin, my grandmother's language. Words I hadn't heard since I was 10 years old, when she died. Itam Wayanawi, Itam Wayanawi. We are returning, we are returning. My blood went cold. How could Brad know Sahaptin? He was a white construction worker from Pendleton who'd probably never met a native person in his life. I administered lorazepam to stop the seizures. It should have knocked him out immediately. Instead, Brad snapped the leather restraints like they were paper. This man, who I'd treated for a herniated disc last year, who could barely lift 40 pounds at his job, broke hospital restraints designed to hold down psychotic patients. It took 3 security guards to restrain him, and when they pinned him down, Brad looked directly at me and spoke in perfect Sahaptin. Winch payu, ikwiak pinaya shapiawi yayix. The woman knows. Tell her grandfather is waiting. My grandfather had been dead for 23 years. I called for emergency blood work with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. When the results came back, I had to read them 3 times. Brad's blood was full of unknown organisms that were replacing his red blood cells. The replication rate was exponential, doubling every 45 minutes. I'd never seen anything like it. I called the CDC emergency hotline and sent photos of the blood samples and the white threads. They called back within 90 minutes. Dr. Vasquez, the CDC officer, said, "You need to isolate this patient immediately, full quarantine protocol, and under no circumstances allow him to bite anyone." What are you talking about? What kind of infection spreads through bites? This is classified, doctor. Just follow protocol. We're sending a team. But I knew they were lying. They knew exactly what this was. Over the next 6 hours, I watched Brad transform. His skin turned ash gray, like he'd been drained of blood. His eyes stayed completely black. He lost the ability to speak English and only spoke Sahaptin, words that made my grandmother's stories come flooding back. The crawler takes over slowly, Mija. First the blood, then the mind, then the soul. When it's done, the person you knew is gone. Only the hunger remains. When Brad opened his mouth to scream, I saw that his teeth had changed. They were sharper, more pointed, and there was an extra row developing behind his normal teeth, like a shark. At 2 a.m., Brad broke his restraints again. He lunged at Jessica Porter, our night nurse, and bit her arm before security could stop him. When he bit down, I heard Jessica's bone crack. Blood poured from the wound. 4 puncture marks, perfectly spaced. Jessica developed symptoms within an hour. Black veins spreading from the bite. High fever. Seizures that came faster and harder than Brad's. Whatever this parasite was, it was learning, getting stronger with each host. Brad died at 4:17 a.m., 13 hours after infection. I performed an emergency autopsy that violated every protocol I'd ever learned. His body was hollow. Those white threads had consumed his organs from the inside, leaving behind a network of parasitic tissue that pulsed like a second nervous system. His brain was 70% parasite. What was left of his human brain showed signs of systematic replacement. Memories, personality, consciousness, all consumed and replaced by something else. The worst part was that Brad's body kept moving for 3 minutes after death. His eyes tracked my movements. His mouth worked silently, forming Sahaptin words I couldn't understand. The parasites were still trying to control their host, even in death. I burned the specimen samples. The threads shrieked, actually shrieked, as they died. Jessica was quarantined in isolation. Over the next day, I watched her disappear. The woman I'd worked beside for 6 years vanished piece by piece. She stopped recognizing her husband, her children. She spoke only in Sahaptin, always the same phrase. Itam Wayanawi Iwa Taixt. We are returning home. On September 5th, Kyle Morrison came to the ER. He was one of Brad's hunting friends, and he had a scratch on his leg. 4 perfect parallel lines, already showing signs of infection. Kyle told me what really happened in the mountains. Brad was looking for his dropped GPS in this huge hollow tree. Big enough to crawl inside, you know? When he pulled his hand out, he had those scratches. Said something grabbed him from inside the tree. We laughed it off. Figured it was just a raccoon or something. He gave me the GPS coordinates. I knew I should call the Forest Service, but something in my grandmother's stories told me that wouldn't help. This wasn't something the government could handle. On September 7th, my day off, I drove up to the Blue Mountains alone. I know it was stupid. I know I should have waited for backup, for hazmat suits, for CDC protocols. But people were dying, and I was the only one who understood what we were really dealing with. I found the hollow tree Kyle described. Ancient ponderosa pine, probably 500 years old. The hollow was big enough for a person to fit inside. I should have turned around. Every instinct, every memory of my grandmother's warnings told me to leave. But I'm a doctor. I fix things. I save people. It's who I am, even when it's who I shouldn't be. I put on thick gloves and looked inside with a flashlight. What I saw made me vomit. The inside of the tree was lined with thousands of those white threads, all moving in synchronized waves. They covered human remains, bones picked clean, wrapped in parasitic silk like a spider's web. I could see fragments of clothing, personal effects, a park ranger's badge, a logging company hard hat, a child's small sneaker. How many people? How many years? The massive threads began moving toward my light, toward me. I pulled back, but one thread landed on my neck where my helmet didn't quite meet my collar. I felt it burning as it burrowed into my skin. I had maybe 10 minutes before it reached my bloodstream. I drove my scalpel into my own neck, cutting deep to extract the thread before it could establish itself. Blood poured down my shirt as I dug the parasite out of my flesh, nearly severing my carotid artery. I poured medical alcohol into the wound and burned the thread with my lighter. It screamed as it died, a sound like breaking glass and crying children. That's when I knew my grandmother's stories were true. When I got home, I called her sister, my great-aunt Rose, who still lived on the reservation. I told her everything. She listened in silence, then said, "Elena, child, your grandmother told you about the crawler for a reason. It's been sleeping for 27 years. Now it's awake again." She told me the real story. The Chawit wasn't just a parasite. It was older than human civilization, older than the tribes themselves. It slept in the great trees, waking every generation to feed. When it infected enough hosts, traditionally 100, they would all return to the nest to complete the cycle. The infected don't die when they reach the tree. They crawl inside willingly, joyfully. Their bodies feed the next generation of parasites. Their memories, their knowledge, their hatred becomes part of the crawler's collective intelligence. "It learns, Elena," Rose said. "Each cycle, it remembers more, gets smarter, harder to stop. Your grandfather fought it in 1996. That's how he really died, not a heart attack. The crawler." By September 9th, we had 8 infected in the hospital. Jessica had bitten an orderly. The orderly bit his girlfriend. The spread was exponential and coordinated. All the infected were speaking Sahaptin, sharing information in a language most of them had never heard before. They were planning something. The CDC arrived and took over my ER. They sealed the hospital and told the media we had a gas leak. They wouldn't let me near my own patients. But Dr. Sarah Walsh, the CDC director, recognized my last name. "You're Maria Minthorn's granddaughter," she said. "Your family has history with this organism." That's when I learned the truth. The CDC has been covering up Chawit outbreaks for 70 years. They have files dating back to 1953. Every 20 to 30 years, the parasite wakes up. People get infected. The CDC contains the outbreak through quarantine and incineration, then classifies everything. Why don't you just destroy the nests? I demanded. We've tried, Walsh said. In 1996, we burned 14 trees, lost 6 agents. The organism had backup nests, decoy nests. It's been evolving for millennia, Doctor. It knows how to survive. On September 11th, 3 infected patients escaped quarantine simultaneously. It was perfectly coordinated. They disabled security cameras, bypassed electronic locks, moved together like a single organism. Within 48 hours, they'd infected 6 more people through deliberate bites. The infected weren't randomly spreading the parasite. They were recruiting. I realized we were dealing with something far worse than a parasitic infection. This was an invasion. The Chawit was using human hosts to establish a foothold, building toward some larger purpose. Rose told me the final piece of tribal knowledge. When 100 hosts return to the nest, the Chawit doesn't just reproduce, it transforms, becomes something that can spread beyond the trees, beyond the mountains. Your ancestors called it the Great Crawling, when the parasite would consume entire tribes. As of September 13th, we had 24 infected. If the exponential spread continued, we'd reach 100 within 2 weeks. I convinced Walsh to let me track the infected back to their nests. We tagged 2 escaped patients with GPS and followed them into the mountains. They led us to 3 separate trees within a 5-mile radius, the original nest plus 2 backup sites. But when we prepared to burn them, something went wrong. The infected attacked our teams simultaneously at all 3 locations. They'd been waiting for us. The Chawit had used our own tracking strategy against us, drawing us into prepared ambushes. We lost 4 agents before we could deploy the napalm. When the nests finally burned, the screaming was audible for miles, not just from the parasites, but from the infected humans who felt their hive-mind connection severed. All 31 infected patients collapsed simultaneously when the nests died. Most went catatonic. 7 died immediately. The survivors were brain-dead, kept alive only by autonomic functions. Jessica was one of the survivors. I visit her sometimes at the long-term care facility. Her body is alive, but her eyes are empty. Sometimes I think I see recognition there, a flicker of the woman I knew. But then it's gone. The official CDC report called it a contained viral outbreak. The media moved on. Case closed. But in November, Rose called me. Another nest, Elena, north of Baker City, bigger than before. I drove out with Rose and 2 other tribal elders. We found a tree that had been feeding for months. 12 complete skeletons inside, wrapped in parasitic silk. The threads were larger, more organized. This nest showed signs of rapid evolution. I called the CDC. They said they were monitoring the situation. Translation: Baker City wasn't big enough to justify intervention costs. That's when I understood the real horror. The CDC doesn't stop these outbreaks. They manage them. They let small communities get consumed as long as it doesn't threaten major population centers. Rural Oregon is acceptable collateral damage. Rose and I have been working together ever since, documenting nests, warning people, trying to save lives without government support. We've found 17 active nests across eastern Oregon. The Chawit isn't dormant anymore. It's awake and spreading. Last month, we found evidence that the organism has adapted to modern society. Infected individuals are using social media, dating apps, travel networks to spread more efficiently. The parasite is learning to use our own technology against us. And the CDC knows. They have algorithms monitoring infection patterns, satellite surveillance tracking nest sites. They could stop it, but they won't act until it reaches Portland or Seattle. By then, it will be too late. If you live in Eastern Oregon, listen to the old stories. Don't camp alone in old-growth forests. Don't reach into hollow trees. If you see 4 parallel scratches on your skin, burn them immediately with whatever you have. And if someone you know starts speaking a language they've never learned, speaking words like Itam Wayanawi, run. Don't try to help them. Don't let them touch you. Just run. Because the Chawit is patient. It's been here longer than our cities, our roads, our civilization. It knows how to wait, how to hide, how to learn, and it's learning from us. My grandmother was right about everything. The old stories weren't just stories. They were warnings. Warnings I should have listened to. Warnings you should listen to now. Because the crawler is coming home, and it remembers everyone who let it sleep.